Mastering in Game of Thrones with a mounted axe. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 1, Braykin at the Moulin Rouge. Game of Thrones. 298. Red Fork River in Aegean land, in a small castle somewhere. Sir, your uncle wants to see you. In a trance, a deep male voice came to Lihao's ears. Sir, when did I, a standard otaku in the 21st century, become a medieval master? Lihao ignored it and continued to dream. But the owner of the voice was relentless. Sir, if you don't get up again, Jules will take away all the gold dragons of the family. And along with the voice came a shove. Lihao opened his eyes, but his mind was still groggy. Soon, he was awakened by the scene in front of him. A middle-aged man in a grey robe was in front of him. The room was dimly lit. The simple wooden door and grey stone walls clearly told Lihao that this was not his little nest. When the grey-robed middle-aged man saw the Lord wake up, he immediately said respectfully, "Your uncle Jules said that he was going to King's Landing to participate in Ned Stark's tournament. He was short of money on the road, so he asked you for 100 gold dragons." The words grey-robed middle-aged man, Uncle Jules, Ned Stark, gold dragon, etc. stimulated Lihao's nerves, and large sections of memories flooded into his mind. After a moment, Lihao, who had digested the memories, knew that he had traveled through time. He traveled to the famous Game of Thrones world. The original owner was named Arthur Braykin, a small lord along the Red Fork River in the Riverlands. He was currently 22 years old. Apart from being handsome and tall, he had no advantages. Although in the Game of Thrones world, this might be a small character who would die before surviving one episode. For Lihao, a young man in the 21st century, this start was already very good. In his previous life, he received 9 years of compulsory education, went to an ordinary high school, and then spent his college life in a dull way. He found a job with a monthly salary of 6,000 yuan, and started his life of slacking off. Of course, there must be something to spice up the dull life, and that thing is Mountain Blade. Lihao plays Mountain Blade at work, after get off work, and even on his way to and from get off work. He loves Mountain Blade so much that he played a Mountain Blade game in his previous life. Make achievements and establish a career right now. While he was thinking, a blue light screen appeared in front of Lihao. Baron, Arthur Braykin level 1 experience. 149 over 600 strength. 12 agility. 9 intelligence. 7 charm. 9 attribute points. 4 skills, Iron Bone 0, Power Attack 4, Power Throw 0, Power Bow 0, Weapon Mastery 2, Shield Defense 0, Running 0, Riding 3, Horse Archery 0, Plunder 0, Coach 0, Tracking 0, Tactics 1, Guide 0, Scouting 0, Healing 0, Surgery 0, First Aid 0, Engineering 0, Persuasion 1, Prisoner Management 0, Leadership 3, Trading 0, Skill points. 5 weapon proficiency, one-handed weapon 74, two-handed weapon 72, pallium 77, bow 31, crossbow 31, throw 31, weapon points. 10. Isn't this the data panel for Mountain Blade? Lihao was overjoyed. The benefits of the time traveler really came. Considering that he would have to go to war in a few months, he did not hesitate to add 3 attribute points to strength and 1 attribute point to agility. The wisdom and charm flow is the one that rules the world, but now he is obviously facing a survival crisis, so it is better to go with the strength and agility flow. 3 skill points are added to strengthen the attack, 1 to strengthen the bow, and 1 to strengthen the throwing. All 10 weapon points are added to the two-handed weapon, because Arthur has an ancestral two-handed greatsword. After adding points with his mind, Lihao, that is, Arthur, put away the data panel, stood up and took off his pajamas, ready to change into home clothes to meet this uncle. 100 gold dragons is not a small amount. I just met an uncle who wanted so much money right after crossing over. What is going on? Amber, the name of the middle-aged man in grey robes, the steward of the small castle, who Arthur just found from the depths of his memory, saw this and hurriedly picked up a robe from the clothing rack next to him and helped the lord get dressed. While getting dressed, Arthur thought about his next plan. If I remember correctly, the Riverland will soon usher in the turmoil of the War of the Five Kings. In fact, before the outbreak of the War of the Five Kings, Tywin Lannister sent troops to the Riverlands to attack the Fish family and their vassals after Tyrion Lannister was captured by Catelyn Stark and taken to the Vale. The banks of the Red Fork River were plundered by a small force led by Gregor Clegane, the Mountain, the strongest man in Westeros. The Bracken family, to which Arthur belonged, was actually the Bracken of the Red Mill, a branch of the Bracken family, the second highest noble family in the Riverlands. Just like the Stark of Carr, who was called Car Stark, this Bracken was not worth much. The family's territory only included 9 nearby villages, a small castle, and a red mill. The entire family had only 35 soldiers who were not employed. It was okay to bully the nearby villagers, but if they were really dragged to the battlefield, they might not even be able to beat the soldiers of the Free family and the bandits roaming in the countryside. In other words, the Bracken of the Red Mill had no strength to resist the plunder of the mountain and the chaos brought about by the War of the Five Kings. If Arthur traveled to the Vale, Dorne or the Reach, he could have been his own lord. After all, the War of the Five Kings had nothing to do with him. But unfortunately, the land he landed on happened to be the Riverlands, which was called the Footcloth of the Seven Kingdoms, and the lords of the Tully family were even weaker and incompetent. If Arthur didn't think about the future early, he might soon become a wronged soul under the sword of the mountain. Fortunately, the original owner's family background was not bad, and the accumulated food was enough to eat for several years, and the family savings were as much as 700 gold dragons. It is better to slip away as soon as possible. Slip away to places without war such as Sealand, King's Landing or Seagull Town, and live a carefree and happy life with hundreds of gold dragons for a while, and wait until the War of the Five Kings ends and the Riverlands return to stability. Before returning 700 gold dragons is a lot of wealth. You know, the fat woman of the Free family married by Aldrobos Bolton is only worth more than 100 kilograms of silver, which is more than 100 gold dragons. Arthur, who had dressed, made up his mind, walked out of the room with his head held high and headed for the hall. Amber followed closely behind him. On the way, Arthur gathered 4 guards on duty and ordered them to find bows and arrows and prepare for battle. The guards received the order and walked quickly to the weapon room. The small castle was not big. When Arthur and Amber walked to the door of the hall, 4 guards came back with 4 other soldiers on duty and brought 8 bows and arrows. The 2-handed sword passed down by the Bracken family was also brought over, and the grey-robed Amber held it for Arthur. After asking the 8 guards to wait outside the door, Arthur and Amber walked into the hall. Even in the daytime, the hall of the castle built of stone was still dim. On the lord's chair against the wall opposite the door, a middle-aged man dressed as a knight was half lying and half leaning, with one foot pretending to be very heroic, and resting on the edge of the chair. Little did he know that this made him look like a country bandit who stole a set of knight's clothes, not what he wanted to dress up as. Arthur recognized at a glance that this was his uncle Jules. Like most second sons, Jules was educated to fight and obey since childhood, and his position was to assist his brother in fighting. But after the original owner, Jules' eldest nephew, was born, Jules was forced to leave here and wandered for 22 years before returning to attend his brother's funeral. The time of wandering was longer than his time in this castle, which also profoundly changed Jules' character. Lazy, muddle-headed, and enjoy life in time. After attending his brother's funeral, Jules stayed at his nephew's house and refused to leave. He used whatever Arthur used and ate whatever Arthur ate. The original owner a few months ago still respected this uncle very much. After all, he was the only close relative. Jules wandered around Westeros and Essos for more than 20 years, and what he experienced, saw and heard along the way could be boasted for several days without repeating. This is exactly what the original owner, who grew up in a small castle, longed for and lacked. The two hit it off immediately and had a very good relationship. But over time, Jules' inferior nature was exposed. He loved drinking, expensive clothes, and going to the beauty market to visit brothels. and these things all cost money. When Jules first asked his nephew for money, the original owner could still give him some, but after gradually understanding his uncle's character, the relatively upright original owner began to despise him. The despised uncle also felt that his nephew didn't like him and was ready to get some big money and run away. This is what happened now. Hey, isn't this my nephew Arthur? Give me 100 gold dragons, and I'll go to King's Landing to participate in the tournament and add some glory to our Bracken family. Jules saw Arthur and Amber come in and pretended to say casually. It seemed that 100 gold dragons were as insignificant as a dinner. But his actions of looking at the window with his face tilted and glancing at Arthur and Amber betrayed his inner thoughts. He was not as carefree as he pretended. Uncle Jules, do you think we are Lannisters with gold mines? We can just give out 100 gold dragons as you say. Arthur, who was standing at the door, asked back. 100 gold dragons is the production of the Brackens of the Moulin Rouge for more than 10 years. Jules put his legs on the edge of the chair and said, so you don't want to pay? Arthur recalled Uncle Jules's various behaviors after he went to the funeral of the original owner's father and decided not to pay a single copper coin. If I don't have money, what can I give? Besides, I won't give it to you, even if I have money. Jules looked up and down at his nephew in casual clothes and Umber in a grey robe, and then glanced at his neatly dressed plate armor, and his confidence increased greatly. He stood up, put his right hand on the hilt of the sword, and shouted in a timid voice, are you going to test whether my sword is sharp? Seeing this, Amber took a step forward, protected his lord, and asked cautiously, what do you want to do? Arthur did not indulge his uncle who had become a gangster, and ordered the guards outside the door, come in and prepare to shoot arrows. 8 guards with hunting bows entered the hall, and drew their bows and arrows according to the instructions of the lord. Arthur chuckled. Uncle Jules, do you want to test whether my arrows are fast enough? Jules' face changed when he saw the 8 soldiers coming in. After hearing Arthur's words, he forced an ugly smile, opened his hands, and walked slowly towards him, as if he wanted to hug. Oh, my good nephew, what are you doing? We are all relatives, and you act like I'm a robber. After a pause, Jules continued to play the emotional card. Look, after your father died, I traveled thousands of miles to attend the funeral. Uncle is just joking with you. Why do you react so strongly? If it were the original owner, he might have forgiven his uncle. After all, the Bracken family of the Moulin Rouge is small, and now there are only 2 members, Arthur and Jules. But Arthur will not be soft-hearted now, and sneered. Stop, take off your sword. Jules stood still with an ugly smile on his face, shrugged helplessly, as if this was the first incident provoked by his unkind nephew. Seeing that Jules was just like an old man, Arthur ordered the guards around him to shoot an arrow. Jules jumped in fear, and the arrow hit the wooden floor under his feet. Seeing that his nephew was serious, his face was uncertain, and he slowly took off his sword and put it aside, and then raised his hands at Arthur's signal. Amber hurried over to take away Jules' sword. Seeing that the situation was under control, Arthur ordered the guards to put down their bows and arrows. After all, drawing a bow for a long time is a very tiring action. Then the young lord raised his handsome chin and said to Jules, I will give you 2 choices. One is to join my guards and patrol every day. I will give you a monthly salary of 5 silver deer. The second is to take off this plate armor, change into the tattered clothes you wore a few months ago and get out. The beautiful plate armor on Jules was bought by the original owner, a full 3 gold royals, and this was the price in the Riverlands, where the handicraft industry was extremely developed. If it was in King's Landing, the price of this plate armor could double. If it was in the Five Fingers Peninsula or the north, where there was a shortage of houses, this outfit might cost the savings of a small noble family. Jules was furious when he heard this. 5 silver deer? What do you think of me? A soldier who can be ordered around. Arthur signaled the guards around him to draw their bows and arrows again, and then slowly said, isn't it? Look at how you just arrived. The people of the mountain clans in the Arin Valley are dressed more luxuriously than you. Amber beside Jules also picked up his sword and pointed it at the greedy old man. The fake knight in plate armor rolled his eyes, glanced at the serious Arthur and the guards with bows, and then glanced at Amber behind him. Although Jules didn't know why his nephew's character had become so tough, his experience of traveling for more than 20 years told him that it was best to bow his head now. Look at you, we are all family, why are you so unfriendly? It's just standing guard and patrolling. Uncle, I can still do it. After hiding his guilty conscience with an awkward smile, Jules bowed his head again. If he couldn't get the money and his plate armor was taken away, then Jules wouldn't have to go out and wander. Although life at his nephew's house might be a little bit harsh, it is much better than living outside and being hungry for 3 days and worrying about your life. Not to mention staying here, you can go to the beauty market every few days to visit the brothels. Normal people know how to choose. Of course, Arthur's behavior today also made Jules look up to his nephew in his heart. He can be so cruel to his own uncle, so he will definitely do well in the future. Arthur was very satisfied with Jules' understanding. After nodding, he sent 8 soldiers away. Seeing that Jules, who had changed from an uncle to a guard, was still stunned, Arthur said to Amber, who had put away his sword, arrange some things for this soldier, and also let him change into ordinary chainmail. Amber agreed. Jules' eyes widened, obviously not very willing, but the situation was stronger than people, so he had to obey his nephew's arrangement. Just as the two were walking out of the hall, a guard ran in hurriedly and shouted, "Sir, the village chief of Riverside Village brought several villagers to see you. P.S. New author, new book, please collect, recommend, and vote for me." Chapter 2 Bandits. Riverbank Village is one of the 9 villages under Arthur's rule. Because it is close to the Red Fork River and has several small handicraft workshops, the whole village is considered a famous wealthy village nearby. It is also the village that pays the most taxes to his family. Since it is his source of income, Arthur cannot neglect it, at least not before running away. He asked the guards to bring the village chief in. Then he sat on the main seat in the hall, ready to fulfill his lord's obligations. I also had the addiction of being a medieval master. According to the rules of the continent of Tisvello, the people of the territory pay taxes and provide compulsory labor for the lords and property knights, and the lords and property knights provide security protection for the people and meet the people's petitions. Bigger nobles can also set up courts and appoint judges to try cases. But the Bracken family is a very small noble, just stronger than some property knights, so naturally they can't afford judges. Therefore, in the territory, Lord Arthur works part-time as a judge and a policeman. As a rule, the king generally does not interfere in the affairs of the 7 kingdoms. It was unusual for Ned to send Beric Dondarrion, the Lightning Lord, to the Riverlands to capture the mountain in the name of the king. In fact, the lord of the family had to come forward to capture the mountain first, and then Hoster Tully, the guardian of the Riverlands, sent people to capture him. After these 2 layers of protection were invalid, it was the king's turn to come forward. Because Hoster was the feudal lord of the Brackens, he should also fulfill the obligations between the lord and the people. The same is true for the king, the feudal lord of the feudal lord. The peasants directly skipped to levels to find King's Landing, which shows how cowardly Tully of the Fish family was. If it was the north of the Wolf Stark family, the Vale of the Eagle family Arryn, or the west of the Lion family Lannister, they could just kill the mountain after they caught him. Soon, the guards came back and led 6 villagers in. The leading villager was probably in his 40s, dressed a little more decently, and looked like the village chief. Without waiting for Arthur to speak, the village chief took the lead and loudly stated his request. "Lord Arthur, you have to send troops to help us catch those damn bandits. Those damn demons who have no humanity and do all kinds of evil. Even the 7 layers of hell cannot accommodate them." Arthur sat upright and said with a serious face, "Take your time, there's no rush." A middle-aged farmer next to the village chief shouted, "We have to be in a hurry. My daughter was kidnapped by them." The village chief turned around and glared at the unruly farmer, then turned around and replied, "In addition to Tony's daughter and my wife, the bandits also robbed most of our silver deer and copper coins, as well as some clothes and food." A young man with his left arm bandaged added, "And my axe, I just bought it from the beauty market." "Why are you yelling in front of the lord?" The village chief seemed to dislike the young man's interruption. He also regretted bringing several victims to the lord's castle. Not only would a farmer wearing dirty clothes cause Lord Arthur to be disgusted, but it would also lower his own evaluation in front of the adult. Why can't you speak, Jace? You are just a farmer. Why are you so proud? If Lord Arthur didn't think highly of you, you would still be digging potatoes in the field. The young man was obviously not an honest man. He immediately fought back and flattered Arthur. This flattery was not right. Not to mention that the current Arthur was a time traveler. The appointment of village chief Jace was also done by the original owner's father. But this was different for village chief Jace. Jace turned sideways and stared at the young man who was overstepping his authority. Didn't it agree that I would be the only one to report the situation to the adults? You are right to interrupt first. Didn't your father, who was a dung pit to teach you how to respect people? The young man was not to be outdone, and he was about to start scolding with his neck stiff. Arthur saw that the situation was not right and immediately shouted, "Enough, quiet down." The young man glanced at Arthur and then turned his head unwillingly. The village chief Jace looked at the young man triumphantly and then turned around to face Arthur. Arthur was also overwhelmed. He didn't know what was wrong with the head of this village chief. His own wife was kidnapped and he was still arguing with others over a small matter. If it was a little later, his wife would become a wife of the next night. Coughing lightly, Arthur asked, "When did the bandits arrive in your village? How many people were there? What was their equipment like? Which direction did they run to afterwards?" A series of questions came out of the Lord's mouth. The village chief Jace was stunned for a moment. Then he slowly recalled, "The bandits came before dawn. They first robbed money, then clothes, and then my wife. They also robbed a lot of miscellaneous things. I'm asking you how many people there are, what their equipment is like, and which direction they fled to." "I'm not here to listen to your nonsense." Village chief Jace's old face flushed, and the young man next to him replied hurriedly, "There were about 12 or 13 people. Only the 2 or 3 leading people wore armor. The others were holding swords. Their equipment was definitely not as good as your soldiers. It seems that they ran towards the God's Eye Lake." The old farmer who interrupted earlier also added, "In fact, they came much earlier than dawn, but the village chief's house in the center of the village was the last to be robbed, making him think that the bandits came later. They ran towards the God's Eye Lake. There were only a few people on horseback. They probably didn't run far. We can still catch up with them now." Another farmer added. Arthur nodded and approved the information provided by these people. Seeing that the Lord was not very fierce, several farmers became bolder and shouted at the same time, "Master, please help us. That's the wealth of our whole family. If we don't get these grains back, we won't have money to pay taxes." At this time, a blue light screen appeared in front of Arthur. Task: find the bandits and help the people recover the stolen property. There is actually a task panel. Then Arthur knows how to play this system. Finding the bandits and taking back the looted property of the farmers in Riverside Village can not only increase experience, but also enhance the relationship between himself and Riverside Village. In the future, when recruiting soldiers, you can also recruit more. Among the new recruits of Mount and Blade, the strongest one is the old farmer with a dung fork. Not only can you stop the frontal charge of the armored heavy cavalry, but you won't lose blood, and you can just pick up the dung fork to fight. Maybe Arthur's future army will be these old farmers, so he has to have a good relationship with them. The Brackens have 35 soldiers equipped with chainmail, which is more likely to win than a dozen bandits without armor and with ordinary weapons. What's more, this is their own territory, and they can also call on strong farmers nearby to help. Some farmers who can shoot arrows are no less powerful than untrained bandits. Silence. The hall fell silent. Looking around at the faces of these farmers, in their expectant eyes, Arthur said loudly, "I will take people to capture these lawless bandits. P.S. Newcomer new book. Please collect, recommend, and vote for the monthly ticket." Chapter 3: Where to Come From. Like most noble castles, Arthur's small castle is located on a small hill. In addition to the servants' and soldiers' residences, there is also a training ground nearby. Therefore, it is very convenient to summon the 35 soldiers of the Bracken family, including Arthur, Jules, Greyrobe Amber, and 6 villagers from the Riverside Village. There are a total of 43 combatants. If you pass through the villages under Bracken on the way, you can also summon some more peasant soldiers. These troops are enough to deal with a dozen unarmored bandits. After discussion and coordination, Arthur left 8 soldiers to guard the castle, and then he led the remaining 34 people to the riverside village. The riverside village is to the east of Bracken Castle. If you want to track the bandits, you have to go to the riverside village first. The bandits are not all on horseback, so the speed of travel must be slow. Now is the time to catch up. It seems that the bandits have not gone far, and it is still in time to chase them. Jules, who changed into a chainmail, also wanted to stay to defend the castle, but was firmly led away by Arthur. The whole team had 7 horses, but only Arthur rode a horse. The rest of the horses were led by their masters. The group walked along the trail. Soon after they set out, the humid and hot weather in the riverlands made Arthur sweat. Arthur Braykin, 100%. Jules, 80%. Amber, 100%. Riverland Sergeant, 27. Riverlands Peasant, 6. Sir, what is our plan? The young man named Darren from the riverside village saw that the Lord Arthur was not very strict and ran over excitedly to ask. The plan is, well, we will act according to circumstances. Arthur replied casually. He was studying the troop interface and didn't expect someone to interrupt him. Don't you have those detailed battle plans, the ideas of who will be responsible for scouting, who will lead a few people to make a detour, and who will be responsible for cutting off the enemy's retreat? Darren's eyes were shining, and he was obviously looking forward to it. It's not his fault. Which man doesn't like these when he is young? Arthur thought about it. He really had never planned like this. He didn't even think about how to track the bandits. He just set out with 34 people on a whim. If they just walked along the banks of the Red Fork River, they might not find the bandits until they reached the confluence of the 3 tributaries of the Trident River. Even if they found the bandits' lair, some of them might escape with valuables such as silver deer. It seemed that they had to make some plans. Jules, Amber, and village chief Jace, come here. After the people called by Arthur approached one after another, the young lord asked, what do you think about hunting down the bandits? Several people looked at each other, and the village chief replied first. After passing Riverside Village, follow the Red Fork River and you will find those damn bandits. Amber was the chief steward, and was very familiar with the small territory of the Brackens. After hearing the words of the village chief, she said disapprovingly, there are few trees along the Red Fork River, and it is all farmland with a wide field of vision. It is impossible for the bandits to move around the riverbank during the day, and we will definitely not find them if we look along the riverbank. Darren thought about it and echoed Amber's opinion. God's Eye Lake is on the south bank of the Red Fork River, and we are on the north bank of the Red Fork River. Moreover, the further east you go, the denser the population is, and it is impossible for the bandits to live there. Arthur nodded and agreed with the opinions of the two. I also think it is more likely that the bandits will go north. They went southeast of the God's Eye Lake just to confuse us. Uncle Jules, what do you think? Jules sneered. What can I think? When your grandfather was alive, there were few bandits in the entire Riverland. How come there are bandits now, and they dare to rob a village? The period of Arthur's grandfather that Jules mentioned should be the period of the Mad King of Targaryen. In the early period of the reign of Mad King Aerys II, Tywin Lannister, a kind father and filial son, served as the hand of the king and governed the entire 7 kingdoms with peace and tranquility. It can be called a well-governed world. Although it experienced the War of the Usurper later, the situation quickly stabilized after Robert became king and Jon Arryn came to power. The banks of the Red Fork River are the hinterland of the river, with flat terrain, many rivers, dense population, and extremely developed agriculture and handicrafts. In other words, there is no environment for bandits to grow. The bandits who robbed the riverside village of more than a dozen people are already a large team. According to the original owner's memory, there have been no bandits in recent years, nor did they receive any notification from Rivera nor the nearby nobles to guard against bandits. So where did this group of bandits come from? Arthur expressed his doubts. Did this group of desperados jump out of the stone? Maybe they ran over from the mountains of the Vale of Arryn. Darren guessed. The village chief was very annoyed to see Darren jumping around in front of the Lord, so he retorted, let's not talk about the fact that you have to pass through so many lords' territories from the Vale of Arryn to the north bank of the Red Fork. Let me ask you, how do they cross the Green Fork and the Blue Fork? The Green Fork, the Blue Fork, and the Red Fork are the three major tributaries of the Trident, and they are distributed from north to south. Since the Green Fork is not ordinary wide, the Twins of the Free family is the only passage from the Twins to the intersection of the three forks. This is also the reason why Robb Stark must pass through the Twins of the Free family after he started his army. If you want to run from the high mountains of the Vale of Arryn to the north bank of the Red Fork, you must first run from the Bloody Gate, the important pass of the Vale, to the King's Road, then cross the Ruby Ford to the south bank of the Trident, and then cross the Red Fork to the north bank. The Bloody Gate and the Ruby Ford ferry are both heavily guarded, and it is unlikely that a dozen adult men with weapons can pass through. Darren was speechless. He was a farmer, and the only education he received was to write his own name. He couldn't even read a map, let alone these geographical knowledge. Amber said to himself, if it's not from the east, could it be from the north? That's even more impossible. The north is the Blackwood, a great noble. When Arthur heard this, he also felt that it was impossible for the bandits to come from the north. Because the Blackwood family is in the north, the family strength is enough to rank among the top 5 in the Riverlands, and they usually support 2,000 to 3,000 full-time soldiers. You know, the stronger the strength of the nobles, the stronger the control over the territory, and the fewer bandits there are in the territory. This is really strange. How come bandits come to rob as soon as my eldest nephew becomes the head of the family? Jules, who has seen a lot, did not forget to mock Arthur while expressing his doubts. From what he said, it seems that there are bandits because of Arthur. The Lord also felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't tell what was wrong. This is the continent of Westeros, under the attack of lords, feudal lords, kings, armed churches and other forces. There are almost no bandits. Don't worry about it for now, Arthur said loudly. When we get to the riverside village, Amber will go north and Jules will go east. You will each take 2 people on horseback to track the bandits' tracks. Village Chief Jace will gather some villagers who can shoot arrows and use axes. Let's go and knock down these hateful bandits. P.S. Newcomer and new book, please collect, recommend and vote for the monthly ticket. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 4. Are you worthy of being called Arthur? Everything went according to plan. After arriving at the riverside village, Jules and Amber each led their men to track the bandits in the east and north directions. Village Chief Jace gathered the young and strong men among the villagers and asked Lord Arthur to select them directly. 15 Hegian peasant soldiers joined your team. A blue light screen appeared, reminding Arthur of the changes in his troops. After rectifying the military discipline, Arthur determined the preliminary battle plan according to his own understanding. It is already noon now. It may take until midnight or even tomorrow to find the bandits and chase them. At that time, the wife of Village Chief Jace will really be the overpass wife, and the abducted peasant daughter may also be defiled. So we have to act quickly. After arriving at the bandits' hiding place, 20 Hegian soldiers armed with chainmail and round shields charged in front, followed by 21 Hegian peasant soldiers. 10 soldiers are equipped with crossbows, and 8 peasant soldiers have hunting bows, both of which can be used as fire suppression during the charge. Including Jules and Amber, there were 7 people riding horses, encircling the bandits' retreat, and preventing them from escaping. After the group had lunch organized by the village chief Jess in the riverside village, Jules brought his people back. He said that there was not even a rabbit along the Red Fork River. Soon, Amber, who was heading north, rode back and said that he had found the fleeing bandits and left one person to monitor them from a distance. Although he didn't quite understand why the bandits didn't escape far, Arthur immediately ordered to set off, and the whole team trotted forward to catch up with the bandits fleeing north. Jules, Amber and others naturally had lunch on the way. Do you think that Arthur Braykin will take the bait? A young man on horseback asked the middle-aged man next to him in the bandit team that Arthur and his group were trying hard to catch up. Although the young man was wearing coarse cloth clothes and his face was deliberately smeared with a layer of mud, it can still be seen that his skin is delicate and shiny. The middle-aged man looked much darker, but he was strong and muscular, not like the skinny bandits with malnutrition. Just by looking at their skin, these two men were definitely not bandits. Not to mention the fine armor that was exposed at their collars and cuffs. Arthur has a good reputation. He will definitely catch up for the property of the people and these two women. It's not to let the Brackens catch up that we deliberately walked so slowly. Otherwise, according to the original plan, we would have run back to Sweetwater Springs in the afternoon. The middle-aged man replied, "Roger, is there any problem with this plan? Will we be punished by the king if we are discovered?" The young man was perhaps a little unconfident, and there was a tremor in his tone. "No problem at all. This time, I must kill Arthur Braykin and take over the 9 villages of Red Mill," the middle-aged man said with full energy. The reason why he planned to kill Arthur was very simple. First, he considered his own territory, and second, the Brackens and Blackwoods were feuds. That's right, the middle-aged man is Roger of the Blackwood family in Raventree, and the young man is Brynden, the eldest son of Earl Titus, the head of the Blackwood family. The two are distant cousins. The Blackwoods and the Brackens have been fighting in the Riverlands for thousands of years, and their grievances can be traced back to the Age of Heroes. From the construction of Harrenhal by Heron the Blackguard to the Dance of the Dragons, and then to the Blackfire Rebellion, whenever there is a major turmoil, the two families will always fight. Generally speaking, the territory of the Blackwood family is on the north bank of the Red Fork River, with Raventree as the center, and the territory of the Brackens family is on the south bank of the Red Fork River, with the head of the family in Stonehenge. But there are exceptions, such as the Brackens of Red Mill, where the main family of Brackens divided the territory and ruled it separately a long time ago, in order to make their own villages on the north bank of the Red Fork River have a strong claim. This is equivalent to setting up a stronghold at the doorstep of the Blackwood family. The so-called thorn in the eye and the thorn in the flesh is also true. So for nearly 100 years, the Blackwoods on the north bank of the Red Fork River have been looking for trouble whenever they have the chance, making the Brackens of the Red Mill uneasy. But with the help of the main Brackens on the south bank, the Blackwoods refused to take over this small territory. There has been no major events in recent times, so Roger Blackwood has set his sights on these villages. Because he is just a propertyless knight and has no inheritance rights, he has to plan for the territory early. According to the territorial customs of Westeros, if the Blackwoods took this land and then divided it with Roger, he would be a property knight. If he made some merits, he could be promoted to a small noble such as a knight or a baron. Roger recently relied on his swordsmanship to get in touch with Brynden, the eldest son of the Blackwood family. Brynden is the most beloved son of the family head, Earl Titus. If Roger and Brynden get these villages, and then Brynden says a few good words to his father, then Roger will have no problem getting this land. The young Brynden Blackwood also supported his cousin's idea of taking over Arthur Braykin's territory. He also wanted to do something to get his doting father's approval, so he took 10 soldiers disguised as bandits to rob the riverside village. In order to catch all of Arthur Braykin's troops, 150 fully armed Blackwood soldiers were waiting near the Sweetwater Spring to kill Arthur, who left the castle to protect the people. After Arthur was killed, they claimed that Arthur entered the Blackwoods territory in the name of catching bandits to plot against the law. Then they confiscated the 9 villages and created a fait accompli. The incident happened suddenly, and the main family of Braykin on the south bank probably couldn't react and couldn't fight with the Blackwood family of equal strength for the life of a small lord of a branch family. They could only go to Riverrun to sue the Tully family. Hoster, the head of the Tully family, was seriously ill again, and the affairs of the river were in charge of the eldest son Edgemere. Edgemere was a well-known goody-goody who would not offend either side, so the plan was shelved. So the key to the whole plan was to kill Arthur Braykin in the chaos, and then occupy the 9 villages as quickly as possible. Are the 2 people behind still on the lookout? Roger asked the bandit behind him. They were still there just now. Maybe they went to report. The soldier from the Blackwood family, who was wearing a chainmail, but deliberately covered with a tattered robe, replied. It seems that they haven't caught up yet. We are not far from the Sweetwater Spring. Let's slow down a little bit, so that those guys can catch up, Roger ordered. Brynden acquiesced to his cousin's behavior, and the soldiers disguised as bandits continued to slow down after receiving the order. But the situation was not quite what Roger wanted. In front of them, a sound of horse hooves sounded, and Arthur and 7 others appeared in their sight. So that those guys can catch up. Who are you? Arthur asked, slowly pulling out his ancestral two-handed sword. The younger Brynden Blackwood's expression changed. He did not expect Arthur Braykin to rush up with several mounted soldiers. Roger, who looked around, laughed, knowing that Arthur's main force was still behind. The knight, who had just turned 40, knew that his chance to show off in front of the future head of the family had come. Whether it was the number ratio of 12-7 or the comparison of high-end combat power, the opponent was at a disadvantage. According to rumors, Arthur's fighting ability was not outstanding. It doesn't matter who we are. What matters is that you are already a dead man. Roger also drew his sword and rode forward. He pointed his sword forward and shouted, "With you, are you worthy of being called Arthur? Are you worthy of being named after the Sword of the Dawn? P.S. Newcomer and new book. Please collect, recommend and vote for the monthly ticket." Chapter 5. A newbie at first glance. According to the original plan, Arthur was going to charge with 20 sergeants and 21 peasant soldiers as the main force. But Amber reminded him that the north was the territory of the Blackwood family. The relationship between the two families was not good. If they found out that Arthur was with dozens of soldiers in their territory, there would be trouble in the future. So Arthur followed suit and accepted Amber's suggestion. He took 6 of the most powerful people on horseback to intercept the bandits. The main force was chasing behind. In the afternoon chase, the distance between the two sides gradually narrowed. As long as the bandits were stopped and blocked for a while, the infantry units could easily catch up. After riding for a while, Arthur, Jules, Amber and 7 others stopped the bandits in a beech forest. On this cloudless afternoon, which is common in the Riverlands, the sun shone through the gaps between the beech trees on Arthur and others, while the bandits and the 2 hostages were in the shadows. The obvious distinction between light and dark created an excellent atmosphere of confrontation. Why am I not worthy of being called Arthur? Arthur felt puzzled. Did he meet a die-hard fan of Excalibur folio? Having the same name is nothing. The most common thing in the Game of Thrones world is having the same name. The Wolf Starks had 4 or 5 Brandons, such as Brandon the City Builder, Brandon the Shipbuilder, and Brandon the Shipwrecker, and so on. The Dragon Targaryens have 5 or 6 Eakins. If there is no distinction between titles, it is difficult for viewers and readers to distinguish who is who. It was not Arthur's own choice to have the same name as Arthur Dayne, the top fighter of Excalibur folio. You insulted this name. The middle-aged bandit in the lead rode forward. Do you dare to fight me to the death? Arthur laughed. Do you mean a one-on-one duel? He was just about to test his combat power. According to the worldview of Mount and Blade, 5 attribute points are the level of a normal person, and he is now 15. A strength far beyond that of an ordinary person. Although the original owner had not experienced much actual combat, he had learned some basic sword skills of the nobles and his physical fitness was also good. And he himself likes fighting very much. After all, the greatest fun of playing Mount and Blade is to chop people. Of course. The middle-aged bandit turned over and dismounted, patted his horse, and asked it to go further away. Look at you. If you can catch 3 of my swords, I will let you die more easily. It's hard to say who can catch whose 3 swords. Then, Arthur was about to agree, and Amber the Grey Robe suddenly said, My lord, you are too thin and weak. There is no way you can beat this bandit. If you want a duel, I will go. Although Arthur is tall, he is indeed thin. Jules, who had been silent all the time, also said, let me do it. My little nephew, you are really a little weak. You don't look good. Jules has been wandering in Essos and Westeros for many years. He relies on being a mercenary. He even went to the famous mercenary group Second Sons for a while. Although he is a bit of a jerk, he still has some skills. How do you know if I can beat him if you don't try? Arthur dismounted. He still has the confidence to beat this bandit. Seeing Arthur's determination to be a hero, Amber dismounted and stood in front of the lord. No, I have to go no matter what. The middle-aged bandit laughed and said provocatively, you are not afraid of letting your servants play a double act. How could I be afraid of an aimless person like you? Arthur responded to the middle-aged bandit and then pushed Amber away. Don't worry, I'm not that weak. You wait on the side. After saying that, He drew out the two-handed sword passed down from the Bracken family and strode forward. Seeing this, Amber also drew out his own sword, ready to rush to rescue at any time. Jules had a bad quarrel with Arthur in the morning, and was rejected just now. Seeing that his nephew was determined to show off, he left it alone, and prepared to watch the show. He even secretly hoped that the bandit could kill his nephew, so that he could inherit the family business legitimately. After seeing the two men in the arena draw their swords, Jules snorted coldly and said to Amber, "I bet a silver deer that Arthur can't last 3 rounds." Amber turned back and glared at Jules, ignored him, and turned back to carefully watch the battle. But a soldier named Piper next to him replied, "I bet that the Lord can last 3 rounds, at least 5 rounds. Someone opened the bet, and naturally someone followed the bet. The other 2 soldiers believed that the Lord could last 3 rounds, but not 5 rounds, and each bet a silver deer. The remaining 2 soldiers supported Jules's point of view, but did not bet. In other words, none of the 6 people on Arthur's side was optimistic that he could win. Obviously, the bandit on the opposite side also thought so, and since Arthur left the field, he didn't pay attention to the little actions of the people around him. "Young master of Bracken, you are dragging the sword with one hand, can't you swing the big sword?" Roger said sarcastically. From the moment Arthur dismounted his horse to the moment he walked in front of him to confront him, he was certain that his opponent had little combat experience. This was because Arthur was always facing him head on, which was a taboo in a fight. Even the most inexperienced warriors knew that in a one-on-one fight, one should face the enemy sideways to reduce the chance of being hit. He was very confident and was determined to perform well in front of Brynden. "Hey, cousin, do you think this young Master Arthur is weaned?" Roger asked behind him. Brynden laughed. "I don't think so. He probably hasn't even held a sword, not to mention 80%. I'm sure this is his first time in actual combat." Roger pointed his sword at Arthur, who was standing upright, and tilted his head to instruct Brynden. "His standing posture is wrong. He should bend his body slightly before fighting, so that he can exert force." Brynden nodded, agreeing deeply. "Then hold the sword. You should keep the sword in front of your chest. This way you can block and quickly make offensive moves such as slashing, stabbing, and chopping." Roger continued to comment and walked back and forth in front of Arthur, as if facing a scarecrow that would not fight back. Brynden observed the behavior of the two, then remembered the words of his distant cousin, and improved his evaluation of him a little. This is all practical experience. Arthur was happy. He hadn't won yet, but the bandits on the opposite side had already ignored him. He swung his sword and prepared to attack. This opening move is completely useless. There are flaws all over the chest. Roger commented again, but he didn't attack the flaws, probably because he was disdainful. Of course, he didn't dodge either. And Brynden recognized Roger even more, because he also saw that Arthur's movements were extremely amateurish. One rushed forward with a sword, and the other was still commenting nonchalantly, and the battle began. Jules on the side thought that Arthur was doomed to fail, and began to observe the bandits on the opposite side. He noticed that another bandit on horseback had also followed suit and organized a gambling game for the middle-aged bandit, but the bandits who were not on horseback did not respond. Moreover, more than a dozen bandits were standing in an orderly manner, without the crooked and rascally look of normal bandits. Strange. Are these bandits so disciplined? Jules was puzzled. He habitually glanced at the collar of the young bandit on horseback opposite, and immediately found a clue. Faintly revealed was the pattern of Crow Tree City with a group of crows surrounding the Fishbeam Wood. Someone from the Blackwood family. Jules reacted immediately. Years of mercenary experience made him realize that the opposite side was not a bandit, but a warrior from a hostile family. This is a conspiracy. Although I don't know what the other side's backhand is, the danger is not far away. Jules quietly reined in his horse and prepared to run away. P.S. I'm going through the signing process. You can invest a little, and also, please collect, recommend, and vote for the monthly ticket. Chapter 6 I Surrender. Facing Arthur's attack, Roger swung his sword to block. According to his plan, after this action, he would chop hard and knock Arthur's sword away. After that, the young lord would kneel on the ground and beg for mercy. He would then give Brynden a few comments and kill Arthur, and the operation would end perfectly. Isn't the territory in hand? But his plan was too idealistic. As we all know, ideals are full and reality is skinny. The skinny reality is that Arthur's big sword swung down from the top was so powerful that Roger didn't block it at the first time, and then the sword he held with both hands was slowly pressed down. How could it be so powerful? Roger was shocked and couldn't believe it. Arthur's body burst out with a powerful force that was inconsistent with his body size. At this time, he didn't have the mind to comment. Fortunately, his years of experience made him make the right choice, back off to relieve the force and avoid the attack. Because Roger pulled away too quickly, sparks even rubbed between the blades of the two swords. Brynden on the horse opened his eyes wide, looking at the scene in disbelief. Roger, who was just relaxed and free to point out the situation, was hit by a sword and retreated 2 steps. Jules, who was about to slip away behind Arthur, had his pupils shrink and was obviously shocked by his nephew's chop. He asked himself if he could make the middle-aged bandit with such well-developed arm muscles retreat 2 steps with just 1 sword. Umber also looked at his lord in disbelief. Living with him day and night, he knew Arthur's fighting power best. What was going on? The 4 Bracken soldiers behind were even more stunned. They never thought that Lord Arthur was so strong. The next scene shocked them even more. Arthur swung his sword again and chopped straight at the middle-aged bandit. Roger had no choice but to block again. But Arthur, who had already tested his opponent, used 90% of his strength this time, striving to succeed in 1 blow. You know, he only used 50% of his strength just now. The effect of this attack was very obvious. Roger couldn't block it at all. In order to relieve the force, he had to kneel on 1 knee. The palms of his hands holding the sword were numb. Roger felt that the power on the sword was not like that of a person, but a ferocious beast. In his nearly 20 years of fighting career, this was the first time he encountered such an opponent. No skills, all strength. But he could defeat himself with strength alone. Time may have only passed for a while, but in the eyes of Roger, who was struggling to hold on, it was as long as this long summer. Suddenly, the sword felt lighter, and Roger was relieved for no reason. But before he could react, Arthur's 3rd sword came down immediately. With a clang, Roger, who was unable to use his strength, had his sword knocked away. Fortunately, he was smart and retracted his body so that Arthur's sword, which was still coming, did not hit him. Immediately, the sword, which was still buzzing, was placed across Roger's neck. Roger's head was also buzzing, and the cold touch of the sword on his neck made him speechless. The people around him were all speechless. Whether it was the soldiers of the Brackens, the soldiers of the Blackwoods disguised as bandits, or Brynden, Jules, and Umber, no one could have imagined that Arthur, who looked thin, young, and inexperienced, would win. And he won so easily. The silence in the field could hear the birds chirping nearby. Young Brynden was so stunned that he couldn't speak when he saw Arthur holding Roger's neck with a sword in 1 hand. In his eyes at this moment, Arthur's previous actions were not because he was inexperienced in fighting. It was because the masters disdained to follow the nonsense rules of low-level warriors. This is the real master, the future head of the Blackwood family, thought secretly in his heart. Then Arthur's words broke the silence in the beech forest. Weren't you quite talkative just now? Arthur increased the strength of his hand. Now comment on it. Blood gradually seeped out of Roger's neck. He felt his heart pounding, and his life seemed to be slipping away. The fear of death had never been so real. The desire to live made him shout hurriedly, "Don't kill me, I surrender, I surrender." Arthur smiled slightly, then stopped exerting force, then turned around to find Jules, and asked him to come over and tie up the middle-aged bandit. Perhaps because of Arthur's momentum, Jules couldn't even think of escaping. He had moved to the end of the team, and had no choice but to get off the horse and tie him up. The reason why Arthur didn't kill this man, in addition to the fact that he was a modern soul in the 21st century, King Robert had not died yet, which was a very important factor. At this time, the order had not collapsed, and even murderers could choose to join the Night's Watch on the northern wall to escape the death penalty. In addition, Arthur also knew that there was an extremely powerful law of cause and effect in the game of power. Those who actively kill people will be killed by the same means, except for blood revenge. This law of cause and effect cannot be avoided even by POV characters. Visual character group. When Ned Stark appeared, he killed the Black Deserter with a sword. He obeyed the laws of the North. Later, he was killed with a sword in King's Landing, which also obeyed Joffrey's law. Jon Snow stabbed his own man, Cor in Halfland, with a sword, and he was also stabbed to death by his own man. Robb the Young Wolf was stabbed to death by Old Flade with a dagger, and Old Flade was also stabbed to death by his son Young Flade with a dagger. Jon Snow's Woodling girlfriend shot many villagers to death, and she was also shot to death by a villager boy with an arrow. The Queen of Thorns of the Rose family poisoned Joffrey with poison, and she was also poisoned to death by Jaime. Even the little people without names follow this law of cause and effect. The beautiful Brienne met 3 wolf soldiers on the way to escort Jaime to King's Landing. The 3 soldiers killed 3 maids, 2 of whom died quickly and 1 died slowly. The 3 soldiers also died quickly and 1 died slowly. So in a magical world, like Game of Thrones, it is better to keep a low profile and be positive and kind. After Roger was tied up, Arthur said to the young bandit opposite, "Do you surrender yourself, or do I surrender for you?" The young bandit was probably a little naive and was stunned for a moment before he said, "Why should I surrender? Can't I just run?" Then he ordered the bandits on foot to turn around and run away. Bryndon's idea was good, but there was just one small problem. That was that Arthur's infantry had caught up. The 11 bandits turned around and prepared to flee and found a group of Bracken soldiers rushing up about 30 or 40 steps in front of them. Behind them stood the man who had chopped Roger down with 3 swords. On both sides were dense and irregular beech forests. The choice was clear. At least the beech forest would not cut people. You will fight the opponent's 11 with a team of 50 people. Arthur smiled slightly, knowing that this group of bandits could not run away, so he called the 6 people around him and strode forward. The battle went smoothly. About half of the dinner time, the 11 captured bandits had been tied up. The farmer's daughter and the village chief's wife were also rescued. Fortunately, the village chief's wife did not become an overpass wife. Two-handed weapon proficiency +3. Task: find the bandits and help the people recover the stolen property. Completed. Experience +500. Riverside village favorability +3. Just as Arthur was about to add points, a voice came from the captives. "How dare you kidnap me? Do you know who I am? PS. New author, new book. Please collect, recommend, and vote for the monthly ticket." Chapter 7. A few hundred gold dragons. Who are you insulting? I don't care who you are. If you are captured, you must stay still. The butler Amber the Grey was just feeling happy about the 12 fine swords and several armors that he had captured. Suddenly, he heard that a bandit was so arrogant, so he scolded him without turning his head. Bryndon was about to reveal his identity, but he saw Roger, who was also tied up not far away, desperately winking at him. But Bryndon ignored him. He was the eldest son of Earl Titus of the Blackwood family. When had he ever suffered such an injustice? The nobleman was defeated by a group of peasants, his hands were tied, and he was even scolded by a low-ranking soldier. "I'm Bryndon, the eldest son of Earl Titus. If you don't want to die, let me go immediately and apologize." Roger was speechless at this noble young master who introduced himself. The Brackens are a hostile family. If he doesn't keep a low profile after falling into their hands, isn't he a complete fool? Arthur was shocked that this young bandit actually claimed to be the eldest son of the Earl. He was from the Blackwood family not far from here. Is the world so difficult that even the Earl's eldest son has come out to rob? Then he shook his head and shook off his unrealistic thoughts. Suddenly, Arthur realized, this is probably the Earl's eldest son, because the bandits were searched with standard armor that was obviously only supported by the great nobles. The difference between armor and weapons is that a blacksmith who makes a wood axe or a dung fork can also make swords and other weapons, but armor cannot. In any place, those who play with armor are powerful, and a large number of armors of the same style can only be owned by the princes who rule one side. Although there should be no concepts such as assembly line production and tolerance in the world of Game of Thrones, the weapon workshops of the big families can unify the details. Standard armor in the Riverlands at least must be equipped by big families such as the Tully family of Riverrun, the Free family of the Twins, the Blackwood family of Raventree, the Lord Bracken family of Stonehenge, and the Melista family of Seaward. Just like Arthur's family, there are 3 different kinds of armor. 10 sets were purchased from Lannister Port in the west, 5 sets were purchased from King's Landing, and the other 20 sets were donated by the Lord of Bracken. Otherwise, with the small territory of Arthur's family, it is impossible to have such a high armor rate and accumulate such a huge sum of 700 gold dragons. After realizing that something was wrong, he ordered, "Go check him." 2 soldiers received the order and walked up to prepare for a body search. "No need to search, he is from the Blackwood family," Jules reminded. "Since you already know my identity, why don't you let me go?" Brynden shouted. Arthur was puzzled. Is this guy ignorant of life and death? He is so arrogant when he is captured. Although Westeros has a tradition of not killing captured nobles, does he really think that noble status is a golden ticket to immunity from death? Arthur was about to ridicule Brynden, but Amber walked up to the Lord with a serious face and whispered, "Since he is really from the Blackwood family, let's just let him go." "Are you crazy?" Arthur asked back. "This is a bandit who invaded my home." Then he shouted to the soldiers who were still cleaning up the battlefield, "Hurry up and pack up. We will leave immediately. Since this place is on the Blackwoods' territory, it is better to leave quickly." Amber was a little anxious and advised, "Their family is powerful, and we can't afford to offend them, so let him go. Even if he is really the eldest son of the Earl, he is a proper nobleman, pretending to be a bandit and running to rob my village. This is not right. We are in the right in this matter, so I have to let him go respectfully. Then how should we deal with him? If things go wrong, Earl Titus can attack us on the grounds that his son was captured." Amber looked worried. Arthur walked to the horse that the soldiers brought over, climbed on it, and said to Amber, "Then let his father, the Earl, Petyr redeem him." He rubbed his index finger and thumb. "Without a few hundred gold dragons, this Brynden will have to stay in our cellar." At this time, the soldiers had tied the 12 captives in a row and hurried on their way. Brynden happened to be not far away at this time. After hearing what Arthur said, he was furious and said, "You actually insulted me with a few hundred gold dragons. Do you know what the eldest son of Blackwood means?" "The eldest son of Blackwood means the captive of me, Arthur Braykin." "What? Do you still think this price is too low?" Arthur drove the horse forward and kept pace with the eldest son. "It's not just too low, it's simply not treating me as a human being. Without a bid of several thousand gold dragons, you can't expect my father to redeem me," Brynden said angrily. Arthur was happy that there were people who bargained in the opposite direction. But on second thought, it was reasonable. After all, the most important thing for this group of nobles is face. A powerful earl's eldest son like Brynden may only be captured once in his life. If he bids too low, he may really lose face. If it gets out, the earl's eldest son of the dignified Blackwood family is only worth a few hundred gold dragons. What will others think? Are the nobles in the Riverlands so poor that they can compare with the nobles in the north? If things go wrong, this will be the future Earl Brynden's lifelong joke. The group walked a long way away, and Brynden was still yelling, sometimes asking people to let him go, and sometimes asking people to tie him up a little loose, and he said something like 150 soldiers will come soon, and that he has 3,000 soldiers at home, enough to flatten Arthur's family. In short, he is restless. Arthur ignored him and silently opened the panel. It has been upgraded to level 2 and got 1 attribute point, 2 skill points, and 10 weapon proficiency. The attribute continues to increase strength, 2 skill points increase iron bones, which can save lives, and 10 weapon points continue to increase two-handed weapons. Baron, Arthur Braykin level 2 experience. 679 over 1200 strength. 16 agility. 10 intelligence. 7 charisma. 9 skills, iron bone 2, power attack 7, power throw 1, power bow 1, weapon mastery 2, shield defense 0, running 0, riding 3, horse archery 0, looting 0, coaching 0, tracking 0, tactics 1, guide 0, scouting 0, healing 0. Surgery 0, First aid 0, engineering 0, persuasion 1, prisoner management 0, leadership 3, trading 0, weapon proficiency, one-handed weapons 74, two-handed weapons 95, pallium 77, bows 31, crossbows 31. Throwing 31. According to the mountain's physique, it is estimated that the strength is only 20. As long as Arthur increases his strength to 20 and his agility to about 18, he will have no problem protecting himself from the mountain. Along the way, Amber always felt unsafe and repeatedly persuaded Arthur to release Brynden and not to mess with the Blackwoods. Arthur didn't listen, but he also ordered to speed up. Let's talk about it after we get to his own castle. As for the ransom, he has to find Jesno, the head of the main family of Bracken. If Arthur foolishly runs up to ask for the ransom, he might be killed by the soldiers sent by the other party, and he won't even be able to save the castle. Arthur can still distinguish between gold dragons and his life. Considering the grudge between the Bracken and Blackwood families, Lord Jesno is likely to be happy to see Brynden captured. According to Brynden's suggestion, Arthur thinks he can get 2,000 or 3,000 gold dragons this time. He will give half of it to Lord Jesno, and he will have more than 1,000 in his hands. Dinars are the king. Arthur was thinking happily about the money he got when he suddenly heard Amber's voice. My lord, there are pursuers behind us. P.S. New author, new book. Please collect, recommend and vote for me. Chapter 8 Late Night Help. I've told you long ago that there are 150 soldiers from our family at Sweetwater Springs, but you still don't believe me. Brynden immediately boasted. Arthur looked back and saw that there was actually a group of infantrymen just a few hundred meters behind them. It was estimated that there were about 100 of them. The appearance of this group of soldiers made the whole team agitated, and some people were obviously panicking. Arthur knew that it was time to calm them down. Don't panic. Let's speed up and run forward. Once we enter the castle, they can't break in with such a small number of people. At the Lord's command, the team of more than 50 people immediately moved much faster. Jules rode his horse to Arthur's side and asked tentatively, the enemy is coming fiercely, how about I leave first and go to Stonehenge Castle to ask for reinforcement? Arthur smiled. I think you want to slip away in advance. Stay in the team honestly. If I don't see you when you get to the castle, you can continue to wander out. Of course he knew to ask for reinforcement, and he also knew that it must be someone with the surname Bracken who went to Stonehenge Castle. But Jules couldn't go, because the Lord Genis of the main family did not recognize Jules as the second son. Even if the steward Amber ran there, it would be more likely to get soldiers than Jules. It would be best for Arthur to go and ask for soldiers himself. But now as long as he rode away, the whole team would be demoralized and each would seek a way to survive. The Lord has run away, and people will definitely plan for themselves. In that case, some of the people who ran at the end might be caught by the soldiers of the Blackwood family. Although Arthur did not care much about the lives of these people, he still had the responsibility of being a lord, and had to think about them. Jules remained silent, and continued to hurry with the team. More than 50 people ran at full speed, and arrived at the small castle in the evening. Those who rode horses like Arthur and Amber were fine, and not very tired. Sergeants like Pipe and peasant soldiers like Darren could only slap their faces and grit their teeth to drive away the fatigue of the pursuit in the second half of the road. After sending people to invite all the people nearby into the castle, Arthur rushed to the basement with Amber, Jules and others, ready to find the golden dragons accumulated by the family. First, he had to prepare some gifts for Earl Janis of Stonehenge City. After all, he had to ask him to send troops. Second, Arthur was ready to run away if he couldn't get the soldiers from Stonehenge City. After all, Blackwood really had thousands of soldiers. Third, to prevent Jules from doing anything. Amber was very honest. If Jules deceived her and let him cheat her out of money and run away, then Arthur would really be in tears. The reason for taking Jules was very simple, just to let him know that he had taken the golden dragon away so that he would give up the idea of cheating money and running away. The basement was managed by an old man named Cyril, who was not there when Arthur and others went down. But the key to the room, where valuables were stored, was in Arthur's hand, and the spare key was hidden in Arthur's bedroom. So there was no worry about not being able to open it. Arthur took out the key and asked Amber to open it. Why is Cyril not here? Arthur asked the soldier behind him. One person stayed in the castle today and replied, he said his son had something to do and went out at noon. Arthur recalled that it seemed that Cyril's son was a gambler and old Cyril worried about his son a lot. Spinach monk, no matter which plane he is in, he is a disaster. In the original owner's memory, there was even Cyril's behavior of stealing things from Arthur's house for his son. The stolen things were not valuable, and the original owner only criticized him verbally after knowing it, but did not punish him. Amber opened the door and several people walked in. Arthur followed the original owner's memory to find the box where the money was kept, but found that it had been opened. The money inside was also missing. Fuck, where's the money? What's going on? Arthur was stunned. Amber also often came to this room and was also shocked to see this scene. Where is the adult's money? That's a full 700 gold royals. Jules and other people also looked at each other. Arthur turned around with a gloomy face and looked at the people behind him. Amber was the first to deny, shaking her head like a rattle. My lord, it wasn't me. I didn't have the chance to steal the money. Arthur looked at Jules. Jules laughed angrily. If I stole it, I would have gone to King's Landing to have fun. Why would I have to look at your face? As for the other soldiers, they had no chance to come to the basement, and it was impossible for them to know that there were valuables hidden in this room. Arthur thought to himself, who could it be? None of the people in front of him had the time to commit the crime, and there were no more than 3 people who knew that the money was hidden here. After scanning the people in front of them, Arthur and Jules said in unison, Cyril. It was him. Only this old guy had time to do this. Jules said as if he was trying to steal the credit. Arthur nodded and suddenly remembered something. If he could travel through time, the original owner must be dead. And there are only 2 types of people who have the motive to kill the original owner. One is a blood relative like Jules, who can get the inheritance and the title of knight after Arthur's death. But although Jules is a Sand God type, he is not very bad, so he should be ruled out. One possibility is that he is plotting against Arthur's property. This includes movables such as gold and dragons and immovables such as territories. Only a few families such as Blackwood can take away Arthur's territory, and the eldest son of the Blackwood family is still tied up, so it is impossible for him to be his family. The most likely possibility is that Cyril, a servant who lives with him day and night, secretly poisoned him and then ran away with the money. If Arthur guessed correctly, Cyril should have killed the original owner last night and then found the spare key and was ready to sneak away during the chaotic period when Jules was competing to inherit the title of the territory after the original owner died. But he didn't expect that a bandit disguised as Brynden robbed the village, giving Cyril an excellent opportunity to escape. I must find this old guy, Arthur said fiercely. Because of this incident, Arthur's only choice was to ask for help from Earl Janis's soldiers. Otherwise, once the territory was lost, he would become a landless noble and go out to wander. Westeros is not the Calradia continent of Mount and Blade, where you can't just go to a place and raise a team. The people are still very loyal to their lords. Without further delay, I will take 2 people to ask for troops. The defense of the castle will be presided over by Amber, and Jules will be the staff officer to help with strategies. After giving the order, Arthur reminded Amber again, remember, don't let Brynden go. This is the key to our survival. Then he rode away with 2 soldiers. Not long after running, they saw soldiers with torches surrounding the castle. The firelight dimly illuminated the flag of a group of crows surrounding the fishbeam wood. Damn it, this Blackwood is really bullying, a soldier said. It's not certain who bullies whom. Arthur reined in his horse and headed west. Let's go and get people. There is a bridge in the west that can cross the Red Fork River. From there, pass the Kneeling Stack, and go south to reach Stonehenge City. The 3 of them rode their horses at full speed in the night, heading for the only hope of Bracken at the Moulin Rouge. P.S. New author, new book. Please collect, recommend, and vote for me. In addition, thank you Xing Feng Zhu Sheng for the 2 monthly tickets. Chapter 9. Sending troops at every turn is too barbaric. At noon on the 2nd day, Stonehenge. Like Arthur's family, Stonehenge also flew a flag with a golden shield and a red horse. The 3 of them traveled for half the night last night, rested on the road for half the night, and galloped all the way in the morning, and finally arrived at Stonehenge. I don't know why, but Arthur was not very anxious. He even had the leisure to consider the pattern of his own flag. The red horse of the Brackens fits the theme of riding, and if there is a pattern of slashing, it will be more to his liking. Arthur wondered whether to add a machete to the flag, but there is no rush for this, and we still have to wait until the reinforcements are out. There are not many highlands in the Riverlands, and Stonehenge is also built on a mound. But unlike Arthur's family, Stonehenge is much larger. Like Riverrun, Raventree, Sea Reach, and the Twins, it is one of the few strong castles that was not taken down by Tywin's West Army in the early days of the War of the Five Kings. Although only Riverrun and the Twins in the north held out until Robb led the Northern Army to rescue. But this does show the solidity of Stonehenge. Arthur thought of this, and suddenly felt that he should consider the direction of development. It is known that the current time point is that Robert has taken Eddard Stark south and has not returned to King's Landing. There were about 3 or 4 months between Robert's southward departure and the capture of the Little Devil in the Riverlands, when he returned from the Wall. During this period, the Little Devil, Jon Snow, and Benjen Stark went north to the Wall. The great Emperor Joffrey sent people to assassinate the unconscious Bran, and the Wolf Mother Catelyn went south to report the news, etc. Many small things that affected the situation happened, and Stannis fled back to Dragonstone. The Lion family Lannister was determined to make progress, and the Rose family became the man behind the 3 Deer Enlil Sea Rabine, etc., which greatly influenced the future of the Westeros continent. It is impossible to go out and be free. There will be great turmoil in Westeros in the future. Now that there is no unrest, Arthur's own money can be stolen by servants who have known him for more than 10 years and served him for decades. If he really went to King's Landing, White Harbor and other places to avoid the war, he might be cheated out of everything. You know, neither the original owner nor Leheo in the previous life has ever been in society. It is better to stay in your own territory honestly. At least in your own territory, Arthur is a local emperor. What's more, there is the Mountain Blade system. If he develops better, he can make a name for himself in the War of the Five Kings. Chaos is a ladder, and he is a nobleman in the Riverlands, so his camp is already very clear. The camp of Tully of the Fish family and Stark of the Wolf family. In his previous life, he watched Game of Thrones and was very sad about the experience of the Wolf family. Although Robb's killing of Karstark and the Wolf Mother Catelyn's private release of Jaime are speechless, they are indeed not punishable by death. In fact, the younger generations of the Wolf family, Sansa, Jon, and Arya are all very good people. Sansa spoke up for Dantas and saved his life when she herself was in danger. Arya even remembered the death of Micah, the son of the Butcher. Jon did not discriminate against Sam like other Black Watchmen. Even Robb had a reason to kill Karstark. Two Lannister branch children were killed for no reason after being captured, and the leader of the hostile forces was willing to stand up for 2 dead people. Although this matter is very pedantic, it shows that Robb treats people equally. Like his father Ned, he is pedantic to the point of being annoying, but you can't hate him, because they have people in their eyes. There is another reason to join the Fishwolf camp. Edgemure Tully, the 3-river arrow god. A true arrow god who hits the ground with one shot. How bad can the character of a person who lets his subjects enter his castle to avoid the war be? While thinking, the horse's hooves have climbed up the hill and arrived in front of Stonehenge. 8 soldiers stood in front of the door. Seeing the arrival, the captain of the guards shouted, "Please dismount, sir." Arthur and the other 2 dismounted, and 2 soldiers came over to lead the horses away. "You are Lord Arthur Braykin, right? May I ask if you have an invitation from Lord Janos or Miss Jane?" The captain of the guards walked up and asked. "No," Arthur said anxiously. "I have a big business with Lord Janos, and I need to see him now." Although he was asking for help, he had to change his words. It would be safer to use interests to drive Janos to send troops. With Brynden in his hands, he could at least ask for a ransom of several thousand gold dragons. If he gave half to Janos, he would be happy to come forward. But Lord Janos is not here. He went to Riverrun. The captain of the guards replied. "Then find Hendry." Hendry Bracken is the nephew of Lord Janos and the Earl's favorite heir. Because the Earl has 5 daughters and no son. According to the generation, Hendry is Arthur's cousin. Because Hendry has the sponsorship of his uncle Earl Janos, He often travels to various places in Westeros, so he has not met the original owner, Erotiku, many times. The relationship is not very familiar, but they all have the surname Bracken, and they are also rare families with ancestral blood in the south. It should be no problem to persuade Hendry to send troops. Lord Hendry is in the martial arts field behind the castle. Please follow this guard. After the captain said, he designated a guard to lead the way. Arthur and the other two followed. In fact, the way of entertaining guests in Stonehenge City is a bit impolite. If a noble visits, at least Arthur should be invited to the living room of the castle, and then Hendry should come out to entertain him. But it may be that the captain of the guard knows the details of Arthur's family, or there may be other reasons, so it is not so particular. This is also good, saving a lot of red tape. Do you mean to say that my family will send troops to help you out, and then blackmail an earl? In the martial arts field, Hendry sat on a luxurious chair, and said with his legs crossed. Around him, there was a huge crowd of noble children. On his left and right sat Carol Vance and Marco Piper. The former was the heir of the Vance family in the city of Traveller's Rest, and the latter was the eldest son of Earl Clermont of the Piper family in the city of Pink. The three people sitting were the first heirs of the most prominent noble families in the Riverlands. The people around him ranged from free knights, sworn knights to small nobles and the second sons of large families. Arthur came at an unlucky time and ran into a group of nobles preparing to go hunting. After listening to Arthur's request, Hendry disagreed, did not think it was correct. We are a family. Now that I have the opportunity to make a fortune, how can I forget your family? Arthur replied. Who is a family with you? A small noble with only 9 small villages in the same territory. None of the three people sitting said anything, but one of them spoke first. Obviously, the talk of 9 villages made these nobles find fun, and some began to laugh. Others were holding back their laughter. But Arthur believed that, if only one of the 3 people sitting there laughed, the rest would burst into laughter. Hendry did not laugh at his own relative. Arthur, your proposal is really uncivilized. You always send troops to fight, just as barbaric as the Dorask people. Otherwise, I will send someone to tell the Blackwood family that you are just joking. If you release the people, they will withdraw their troops. How about that? This proposal was impossible. The family savings were lost. Without the money he exchanged for Brynden, what would he use to arm his own people? Arthur's eyes rolled, and he suddenly thought of an idea. P.S. I have been looking up information recently, and I strive to make everyone familiar with the princes of the Riverlands, so that readers will not be troubled during the War of the Five Kings. In addition, I would like to ask for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Chapter 10. Are you afraid of Blackwood? Provocation. This is an ancient method. Although simple, it is very effective. There are 3 heirs of the great nobles present, and the rest of the minor nobles, second sons of the family, free knights, sworn knights, etc. add up to about 40 people. Together with their followers and the guards sent by the landlord of Stonehenge City, the whole team can reach a size of 300 or 400 people. There is no need to summon the soldiers of the main family of Bracken. It is more than enough to deal with the 150 soldiers of the Blackwood family. As for the conflict between the 2 cloths, even the dogs of the nobles have heard of it in the Riverlands. Everyone present is a river noble, and Hendry will not lose face in front of them. From what I hear from your proposal, are you afraid of Blackwood? Arthur asked back. Hendry's face changed slightly, and he glared at Arthur before saying, how can my nephew, Janis, be afraid of a little Blackwood? When the nobles heard Hendry's statement, they all scolded Arthur. Afraid? When have we, Bracken, ever been afraid of Blackwood? How dare you, a knight of a tiny territory? Guess what Hendry is thinking. You can find out from Riverrun to Harrenhal, and see who is afraid of whom. Obviously, they are outsiders, and Arthur is from the Bracken family, but the tone of these nobles is as if Arthur is the outsider. But this is a good thing. As long as they keep outputting, they can always arouse Hendry's competitive spirit. But the nephew of Earl Janis thinks differently from Arthur. After Hendry and the flatterers behind him stopped talking, he said, although we are not afraid of Blackwood, don't expect me to send troops. We are civilized people, and it is meaningless to let a group of soldiers from poor families fight each other. Arthur was a little surprised that Hendry's thinking was so advanced that he was willing to consider the soldiers. He thought for a while and asked, but Blackwood robbed my people and might be killing them right now. Is this interesting? Those people, if they die, they die. That's right, they just lost their lives, but our mood for hunting was disturbed. Get out of here, there is no place for you to talk. The flatterers started to chatter again, and Arthur was a little annoyed. Henry turned around and glared at them, and the martial arts field suddenly became quiet. Then he turned to Arthur and said, "Do you know how much it costs to train a peasant into a qualified soldier, and equip him with weapons and armor? I won't let them die in vain." He held his chin with his right hand and said, "But your subjects, well, this is also a problem. They are also from Bracken, and I can't let them die miserably." Henry pondered and kept tapping the armrest of the chair with his index finger. Carol Vance on the left suddenly laughed. "Since you all want to prevent Arthur's subjects from being robbed by the Blackwoods, why don't we go to Earl Titus and make it clear? The face of us is enough to make Titus not care about Arthur kidnapping his son. Titus is not a man who is easy to talk to. At least we have to show force to make him behave." Marco Piper added, "Show force. Sending troops there will definitely cause conflicts, and conflicts will definitely cause deaths. Deaths will cost money, which is not worth it." Henry's tone changed a little, and it seemed that he didn't want to send troops. Arthur was a little angry. This Henry was dithering like a woman. "Just tell me whether you will send troops or not." Marco Piper might have been annoyed by Henry's indecision. Arthur was not sure what Henry was thinking, so he asked directly, "Under what circumstances will you agree to send troops?" "Of course, a bloodless situation." Henry answered quickly, "Well, I'll give you a chance." "What chance?" "If you can beat 3 knights I designate, I will agree to send troops to negotiate peace with the Blackwood family." Henry's original intention was not to get involved in this matter, but with so many people present today, he would not let Arthur, a native of Bracken, down. So he gave him a chance in the name of a chance. According to Arthur's size and the rumor that he was not good at fighting, he could be defeated by just 3 people. In this way, he would not send troops, and would also give Arthur an explanation. "Didn't I give you a chance? It's just that you didn't seize it." "Fighting? I like it." Marco Piper slapped the armrest of the chair excitedly. Arthur was happy. He didn't expect Henry to decline in this way. But what the nephew of Earl Janis didn't expect was that Arthur now liked duels the most. "Then it's settled. As long as I beat the 3 knights you designated, you will send 500 soldiers to drive out the Blackwood soldiers from my territory?" He suppressed the ecstasy in his heart and carefully finalized the plan. Henry nodded with a smile. Marco Piper was obviously a fighting enthusiast. After Henry confirmed the rules of the game, he stood up and erected the entourage to start setting up the venue. Sometimes he asked the servants to bring more chairs, and sometimes he scolded a knight to move away. Finally, after a chaotic commotion, 40 or 50 noble knights sat down, and fruits, wine, and drinks were prepared. Everything was ready. "Well, Marco, Carol, how about this? Each of us designates a knight. How about it?" Henry asked, sitting on the main seat outside the venue. "Excellent, I agree. I have no objection either." Both agreed. After some humility, Marco Piper designated Arthur's first opponent. Eager Mallister, a free knight from the Mallister family in Sealand City, was strong and skilled in martial arts. After being designated by Marco, Eager was obviously very excited. "I'm glad to have fulfilled my mission. I'm glad to have fulfilled my mission." The people around him laughed, and someone shouted, "You are wrong. Winning is the fulfillment of the mission." Eager took the helmet handed over by the servant of Stonehenge City, turned around and found the person who shouted, "It's the same. It only takes a few moves to win." Arthur was also happy. Why are these people so confident? "Hey, is there anyone who wants to bet? 1 gold royal. I bet Mr. Arthur will win." Someone shouted strangely. There was another round of laughter. But obviously someone was tempted. It seemed that this was a game that Eager would win for sure, so why not make some money? The free knights didn't have much money on hand, so every bit of money was worth it. Looking at the people around him, Henry suggested, "How about this? To add to the fun, I, the landlord, will open a betting market. What do you think?" "What a great idea." "Agree. Then Henry will have to lose money, because no one will bet on Arthur." The atmosphere was very lively. After thinking, Hendry announced the odds. Eager Melista, 10 to 1. Arthur, 1 to 10. In other words, if Eager wins, he will get 1 gold dragon for every 10 gold dragons bet. If Arthur wins, he will get 10 gold dragons for every 1 gold dragon bet. Arthur was very upset when he saw the people around him betting enthusiastically. Because he had no money to bet. Why did the opportunity to make money slip away? And Hendry, the landlord, was very considerate and saw that Arthur wanted to bet but did not take action. So he shouted, "Hey, cousin, how about I'll lend you some money so that you can bet on yourself to win? PS, new author, new book, please recommend and monthly votes." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 11, Iron Making. That's great. I don't borrow much. 10 gold royals are enough, Arthur replied. Hendry stood, holding the armrest of the chair with his left hand, and asked with a smile, "Are you betting on yourself or Eager Melista?" As soon as this was said, there was another round of unbridled laughter in the audience. Arthur suddenly felt a little annoyed. Of course it's me. After a while of arguing, the two sides re-entered the field. An officer from Stonehenge City served as the referee. His duty was to announce the rules and the identities of the two people, and to stop the behavior of both parties after one party admitted defeat. The rules were simple. Arthur and Eager wore protective gear and fought each other until one party said "I surrender," and the other party was considered the winner. Let us invite these two gentlemen. The one wearing silver plate armor and without a mask is Arthur Braykin from the Moulin Rouge. As far as I know, this is his first time participating in such a tournament, and he has no outstanding achievements. Obviously, Mr. Arthur needs the blessing of the 7 gods. And this, Eager Melista, is an old friend we are familiar with. He is now loyal to Sir Marco Piper, and has won many tournaments, including defeating famous free knights such as Forrest Sterling. As the referee explained, Eager raised his right hand holding the sword and his empty left hand, signaling to the audience around him. A large number of nobles, knights and their followers cheered and applauded in response to Eager's actions. In the main seat of the audience, Lekka Vance whispered to Hendry, "It seems that most of them bet on Eager. Although the odds are small, if Arthur wins, the money you have to pay is not a small amount. It's just a few gold dragons." Hendry tried to pretend to be indifferent. "Just consider it as making friends with everyone." Carol looked at Hendry with a playful look and said nothing more. He knew in his heart that Hendry's inheritance rights were not legal. If Earl Janis decided to pass Stonehenge City and the territory to one of his 5 daughters, Hendry would have no choice. So Hendry paid great attention to the relationship with other nobles in the river, in case he had no public support in the future. Carol smiled and shook his head, turning to look at the battle situation in the field. Eager and Arthur were of similar height, but Eager was obviously stronger. The two began to circle, and the people around them were eager to urge Eager to attack. Of course, there were also people who shouted for Arthur to be beaten quickly. Arthur noticed the movements of the knight whose face was hidden in the mask, and thought that he was also a powerful type, so he was no longer afraid, and swung the sword with both hands to chop directly. Ija was also observing, but he didn't expect Arthur to dare to take the initiative to attack. After leaning back to avoid Arthur's chop, Ija sneered, "You don't think that your 3-legged cat's kung fu can beat me? How can I know if I haven't fought?" Arthur swung the sword again. Ija was ready, no longer retreating, holding the sword in both hands to meet him. The two swords collided fiercely with a bang, and then the two began to wrestle. The audience cheered, and many people shouted to knock him down. Obviously, this he refers to Arthur. The wrestling action continued, and the audience's passion gradually faded. Among the 3 people in the main seat, Marco watched the most seriously, and at this time he exclaimed softly, "This Arthur is good. He can hold out with Ija for so long. He is the Lord of Ija, so he naturally knows Ija's strength. It's just that Ija didn't exert his strength," Hendry said with disdain. As soon as he finished speaking, with Arthur's loud shout, Ija was forced to retreat 2 steps. Arthur rushed forward again with his sword waving, and Ija raised his sword to block, and there was another bang. Carol was amused. These two are just forging iron here. Marquette turned his head and said to Carol, they are really forging iron. The strength of these two people should be about the same, and Arthur is slightly stronger. Hendry didn't want to send troops, so he was very unwilling to see Arthur win, and he sneered at these words. Maybe Ija is hiding his strength, waiting for Arthur to be careless, and then defeating him in one fell swoop. That Ija's acting is really great. I didn't even see it from my knight. Marquette stared at the field. If Arthur can win, I will bet on him to win in the next round. This time he bet on his own Ija to win, and the stakes were as high as 50 gold dragons. He originally wanted to get 5 gold dragons from Hendry, but now he had a feeling that he might lose all his money. Even though he was the heir to the Pink City, it was still painful to lose 50 gold dragons at once. Carol held the opposite opinion. Arthur may not win. Look at the situation on the field. Both of them are not very agile, and Arthur's swordsmanship is not superb. Ija still has a better chance of winning. Hendry was much more entangled. On the one hand, he hoped that Ija would win, so that he would not have to send troops, but this meant that he would have to pay a few dozen gold dragons in compensation, although this was necessary to maintain a relationship. On the other hand, he hoped that Arthur would win, so that the bets of hundreds of gold dragons on the field would all be his. Oh, by the way, he also had to give Arthur 90 gold dragons. Hendry blushed for his wavering position. After all, he was not yet the legal first heir to the Earl of Bracken. If he had a little more money, he wouldn't have to worry so much. If Count Genis had made it clear that he was the heir, he wouldn't have to go to such great lengths to please these small nobles and knights. The fight on the field had already reached a white-hot stage. Arthur kept advancing, and Igor staggered back, swinging his sword to block from time to time. The people around him kept shouting for Igor to attack, as if it was the knight who took the initiative instead of the small noble. But only Igor himself knew how strong the young man in front of him was. Strength that was inconsistent with his size was constantly generated from his body, as if he would not get tired. He was simply a human-shaped violent bear. Every casual blow was like a sledgehammer that no one could resist. Igor's blade had been chopped into bits. After Arthur forced Igor back again, he knew that his opponent was about to run out of strength. So he decided to end the fight. Arthur raised his sword, and Igor also raised his sword defensively to block. But Arthur made a feint, and swung his sword at Igor's left leg with one hand. As Igor was preparing to use his strength to meet the attack from the front, he did not expect Arthur to attack the bottom lane. He did not have time to retract his left leg, and the armor on his left leg was cut into a big dent. Damn it. He groaned in pain in his left leg. There was a burst of booze around him. Igor swung his sword downward to counter-attack, but he did not expect Arthur to approach him closely and hit him hard. Igor could not exert strength on his left leg and pushed his right foot back, but still fell down. 7 levels of hell. Arthur did not miss this opportunity and swung his sword to Igor's neck. I surrender. I surrender. Igor screamed in fear. If the sword had been cut, he would really go to the 7 levels of hell. Arthur Braykin wins. The officer did not forget his duty and immediately announced Arthur's victory while running over to help Igor up. The audience booed loudly. Some people lost a lot of money and cursed at several generations of female relatives of Igor. Hendry breathed a sigh of relief. Not only did he not have to pay dozens of gold dragons, but he also earned nearly 10 times the money. Now he felt that Arthur was a little more pleasing to the eye. P.S. Please recommend on monthly votes. Chapter 12 Dylan. Excellent. Marquette was the first to stand up and applaud. People who were friendly with Piper and the Pink City forces also stood up and applauded, but not many of them were sincere. No one who lost a large sum of money would sincerely cheer for the culprit. Obviously, Marquette was not that kind of vulgar person. Seeing his lord applauding for his opponent's victory, Ija, who was helped up, was ashamed. He said nothing, lowered his head and limped out. Others watched Ija leave silently. It was quite rare that neither the winner nor the loser received the cheers or sympathy they deserved from the audience. Seeing that the atmosphere was not right, Hendry, who had gained an advantage, felt that he should appease the people. He also stood up and said loudly, "My friends, Arthur won by chance, and I got such a large fortune. I should share it with you. He paused, waited until the audience was quiet, and then said, I will pay for the accommodation, food, drinks, etc. that you will spend on the hunting trip this time. The original plan of this group of people was to go out hunting, but a few partners of higher status did not come, so they stayed in Stonehenge for a while. Of course, they also wanted to take the opportunity to practice martial arts and teamwork. After all, according to rumors, King Robert has crossed the Trident River with the ridiculously large wheel palace, and will return to King's Landing soon. At that time, according to Robert's temperament, King's Landing will definitely hold a grand tournament for the new Prime Minister, Duke Eddard Stark. Needless to say, the prize of tens of thousands of gold dragons, the opportunity to become famous in one battle and the appreciation of the top lords of the kingdom are all the reasons for luring free knights, small nobles, family children without inheritance rights and other armed personnel to King's Landing. Not to mention the Kingting wine, the sword of the West, the rare treasures shipped from the major free trade cities, the singing bards in the taverns, and the romantic female workers. It is necessary to prepare for such a tournament. The group of people was stunned for a moment, and then cheered. Although they lost the bet, they could participate in a hunt without spending money, which was a bit of compensation. Now we will have the second game. Hendry took the opportunity to announce, Sir Carl, please appoint your knight. Logically, Arthur should rest for a while, but Hendry obviously had his own ideas. Others were cheated of a lot of money by Arthur, and they would not speak for Arthur for a short rest. Carl Vance scanned his family back and forth several times, and finally his eyes stopped on a young man of medium build. This man was called Dylan Wishu, with superb sword skills and agile body movements. He was the best berserker like Arthur who was brute force but not flexible. If this man could defeat Arthur, Hendry would probably owe him a favor. Carl thought vaguely. Dylan, are you willing to? I'm willing. Before Carl finished speaking, Dylan had already squeezed out of the crowd and answered repeatedly. It seemed that this was a free knight who was eager to prove himself. When Dylan appeared in front of the crowd, some people booed when they saw his physique. After all, Ija, who was as tall as Arthur and much stronger, was defeated. Dylan, who was half a head shorter and didn't look very strong, was even less likely to win. Some people who were curious heard the disdainful boos and sneered. What do you know? This kind of person is Arthur's opponent. When Arthur can't catch up with him and is exhausted, one sword will decide the outcome. Some people nodded in agreement, while others watched coldly without saying a word. Arthur felt much more relaxed when he saw his opponent. This time, more people were optimistic about Arthur, and some were optimistic about Dylan. Compared with the previous time, there were great differences of opinion. Gentlemen, do you want to open another betting? Hendry asked, trying to suppress his joyful tone, to avoid attracting others' disgust. Open. Come again. Most of these people knew some martial arts, and they all had their own opinions on who would win, Arthur or Dylan, and they couldn't convince each other. Besides, the loss of betting on Iga was a bit big, and every bit of money they could get back was a bit better. Hendry nodded. Then the odds for Arthur's victory will be 1-2, and for Dylan, 2-1. How about that? After the free knights and the nobles' followers whispered to each other, they nodded to show their approval of the odds. The wealthy knights and nobles were much more relaxed, and didn't feel much about the odds. Just like last time, the bettors paid the money to the dealer Hendry first, and then the two officially started the game. Of course, it wasn't Hendry who collected the gold dragons, silver deer, etc., but 3 or 4 servants who did this. Arthur was able to sit on the sidelines and rest for a while. After all, it was very hard to fight with a middle-aged strong man. Do you want to cash in your 90 gold dragons now, or continue to bet? Hendry asked Arthur across 2 rows of people. Of course, keep betting on me. Arthur stood up and said confidently. If he didn't even have the courage to bet on himself to win, there would be no need to fight this match. Then he walked to the center of the field and prepared to start. Just like last time, the officer who was the referee gave the explanation first. Sir Arthur, I believe everyone is familiar with the man who defeated Iga. This time, there were some scattered cheers. Arthur also waved his sword and responded to them. Dylan Wishu, a knight from King's Landing, currently serving Sir Carol Vance. As for famous achievements, There are no famous achievements yet, but it doesn't matter, maybe there will be some later. The officer secretly expressed his preference. Arthur smiled and didn't care. Dylan also raised his hands to show his figure. Then the officer stepped aside, and Arthur and Dylan began to confront each other. Arthur should be careful, his sword is not as big as yours, but it is much more flexible. Someone outside the field reminded. It seems that someone bet on Arthur to win. Arthur nodded to indicate that he heard it. If reminders are useful, what do we need the Meester's milk of poppy for? Dylan sneered. This should be the first time he has fought such a competition for Calor. From the time he appeared to the confrontation now, he has been unusually active. As expected, Dylan took the lead in attacking. He first leaned forward in a bow stance, and then suddenly thrust out a sword. It was very similar to the sudden attack of a fencer in his previous life. Since Dylan was half a head shorter than Arthur, and he was so short, the angle of attack was quite tricky. It was roughly above Arthur's chest and abdomen. Arthur couldn't use both hands to swing the sword, so he had to take a step back suddenly, to try to avoid it. Who would have thought that Dylan leaned forward, pressed the center of gravity on his front legs, and swung his back legs in front, and continued to attack at this height. Whether stabbing or slashing, he was extremely flexible, and he was always not far away from Arthur, so that Arthur's sword could not be involved in the battle. Arthur then retreated, but he did not pull away. He understood that this person's fighting style was to fight close to the body. Due to Dylan's active attack and Arthur's confusion, there was a burst of cheers on the field. Just by listening to the sound, we know that there are still many people betting on Dylan to win. After all, Arthur has already fought a battle and consumed a lot of physical strength. In a few breaths, the two have fought to the edge of the field. It seems that Arthur will have to take a hard sword to change the situation. I don't know if this plate armor can defend against it. P.S. Please recommend on monthly votes. Thanks Iron Heyo for the 2 monthly votes. Chapter 13. This wine is good. Iron Bones is a skill on the Mountain Blade panel that can add 2 points of health per level. Arthur's panel has no health, but Iron Bones still exists. According to the 40 points of health that each character has at the beginning of Mountain Blade, the effect of each point of Iron Bones is roughly to increase the health by 5%. After the battle of capturing Bryndon, Arthur added 2 points of Iron Bones to himself. If he could avoid the vital points and take a hard hit to reverse the passive situation, Arthur thought it would not be impossible. With his mind made up, he took advantage of Dylan's stab and thrust forward to receive the sword. He turned slightly and used the arc of his ribs to slide Dylan's sword away. Dylan forced Arthur to the edge of the wooden fence of the venue. He wanted to let the opponent dodge along the edge, and then he would wait for an opportunity to attack. Unexpectedly, Arthur was so anal that he could withstand a sword. Dylan stabbed casually without much force. Arthur was wearing plate armor. In order to stab, Dylan inserted the tip of the sword into the gap between the two boards. This gap is usually padded with cowhide, which is enough to reduce some of the impact. Arthur turned around and avoided the vital points, so no substantial damage was caused. It was just a layer of skin broken. At this time, Dylan's sword was caught by Arthur's armor, and Arthur and Dylan were only an arm's length apart. Arthur did not use the sword, but directly swung up with his empty left fist. A left hook hit the right eye of the greedy and reckless opponent. The cowhide gloves hit the steel face armor, causing Arthur's finger bones to ache. But Dylan was even more uncomfortable. His right eye was numb, and he could not see clearly. Arthur's second punch followed, hitting Dylan's right chin directly. After Dylan took 2 punches, he finally pulled back his sword, and then stepped back before Arthur's third punch arrived. Arthur did not chase, but kept his sword in front of him. At this time, he understood what the middle-aged bandit said. The sword in front of the chest is the fighting posture, otherwise it is easy for someone to drive straight into it. In this round, Arthur's armor was broken, and he was slightly injured. Dylan took 2 punches and staggered. It seemed that Arthur was at a disadvantage. Fuck him, Dylan. F***k him. Good job, that's it. He's big and can't react as fast as you. 2 punches for 1 sword. Worth it. Arthur, don't just stand there. Go up and chop him. Outside the arena, various voices came one after another. The little blood flowing from Arthur's chest greatly stimulated the audience, making them more enthusiastic. The two men closed the distance of 2 or 3 steps again and began to test each other. "Boy, you will pay for these 2 punches." Dylan pressed his right eye through the visor. "Hey, bastard of King's Landing, you have to call me Lord." Arthur corrected him. "Wishu is the surname of the bastards of the King's territory, just like the bastards of the North are all surnamed Jon Snow. So what if I'm a bastard? I can easily beat you, Lord." Arthur responded to Dylan with action. He held the sword in both hands, leaned forward, took a step forward, and slashed horizontally from the left side. If he slashed from top to bottom, the opponent could block with the sword, but it would not be very effective. However, if he slashed from the side, Dylan would not be able to exert any force, and he would either take it head on or retreat. As expected, Dylan blocked with his sword upright. Arthur was happy and was about to exert force, but his eyes blurred. He was dazzled, but the audience outside the arena could see clearly. When the 2 swords collided, Dylan changed his footsteps and slid to Arthur's side. With another kick, he kicked Arthur's right knee. Arthur's center of gravity suddenly became unstable and his right knee hit the ground. "Damn it, it's the trick." This was Arthur's first reaction. In order to avoid falling forward, he had to retract the sword and lean on the ground to relieve the force. Dylan was not idle either. He took a step back and stabbed directly at Arthur's right back. Although Arthur could not see the situation behind him, he knew it was not good, so he immediately rolled forward a circle and then stood up and turned around. Dylan's attack followed like a shadow, stabbing Arthur's jaw. Since Arthur only wore a helmet, without protective gear such as a mask or visor, or even a neck guard, he had no time to block and could only retreat. The 2 of them were in a situation of chasing each other. The main seat of the audience. "Arthur is struggling this time," Carly Vance said with a smile. "Dylan is a free knight who is temporarily loyal to him. Such performance is naturally a face-saving thing for him." He even thought about making Dylan his own sworn knight in the future. Free knights are also called wandering knights. In the eyes of the nobles, they are mercenaries with the title of knight. But sworn knights are different. Knights swear to be loyal to the Lord and never betray or leave. The Lord naturally has to pay the corresponding price. In addition to paying for living expenses and a certain commission, he is also responsible for the knight's old age and their descendants. Marquette didn't think so. Dylan gave up his advantage of flexibility and turned to close combat with Arthur. "It's really stupid. It's because you bet Arthur 10 gold dragons that you protect him like this." Carlia felt that he had discovered the truth. "Don't use your own little thoughts to guess the thoughts of a noble man like me." Marquette took the wine glass handed over by the servant. "Arthur fought for his own people. Such a lord deserves respect." Then he turned to Hendry and said, "Why don't you send someone to make peace with the Blackwood family, and I will send someone too." The face of the 2 families is enough to make peace in a small territory with only 9 villages. Hendry also took a glass of wine. "Well, it's quite good." He raised his tone and tried to change the subject. "This is the wine you brought. It's much better than the horse urine along the Red Fork River." Seeing that he was pretending to be confused, Marquess snorted and stopped talking. He turned his head and focused on watching the battle. After a few more rounds, Arthur's plate armor had fallen off the chest and right leg, and several bloodlines flowed on the silver calf armor. Dylan was not doing well either. His face armor had been knocked off by Arthur, and half of his face was swollen. He still fought close to the enemy, but his speed had dropped visibly. Arthur was clumsy as always. Outside the arena, the voices supporting Dylan grew louder. Because Dylan was still intact, Arthur had already started bleeding. The 2 were not far apart, and Dylan continued to press on, swinging his sword straight into Arthur's chest. The armor here had fallen off, and if it had been stabbed, his life would have been over. Arthur leaned back and swung his sword back with one hand. But his feet slipped, and he actually fell. Dylan was overjoyed. After dodging Arthur's sword, he strode forward and stabbed his neck with all his strength. The tip of the sword was only an arm's length away from piercing Arthur, and it seemed that he had already won. Dylan wanted to show mercy, but Arthur never shouted surrender, so he stabbed straight down. Several people outside the arena exclaimed and felt sorry for Arthur. Marquette even stood up. "Is Arthur defeated just like that?" And more people began to applaud. Obviously they believed that Dylan had won. At this juncture, the situation suddenly changed. Arthur kicked Dylan's leg and held the sword with his right hand in a leather glove to keep it away from him. Dylan lost his balance and fell on Arthur. The sword was pushed to Arthur's right hand by both of them. P.S. New author, new book. Please recommend and vote. Chapter 14 Hans Derry. This posture was a bit awkward, but Arthur knew he should win. Taking advantage of Dylan's fall, he used his right hand to push away Dylan's sword, then turned over and rode on Dylan. He punched Dylan with both fists. Under the gaze of dozens of people who were originally applauding, Arthur threw 7 or 8 punches. 7 or 8 punches that were sincere and without any compromise. Poor Dylan. It was the first time in his life that he was beaten so badly. Well, I surrender. I surrender. Although his eyes were swollen and he couldn't open them and his mouth was bruised, he still insisted on sending a surrender signal. Otherwise, he might really be beaten to death. The referee officer immediately ran over and pulled Arthur away to prevent him from continuing to attack. After ensuring that Dylan was still alive, the officer announced, "Lord Arthur Braykin won." A few people represented by Mark stood up and applauded Arthur, while the rest continued to greet Dylan's mother. All kinds of dirty words came out one after another. After all, Arthur's 2 victories made many people lose a lot of money. When Dylan was carried out, more than one person spit at him. Although Arthur was also the key to their loss, no one was stupid enough to offend someone who could beat Eager and Dylan. Many people began to think that most people present could not beat Arthur. If nothing unexpected happens, after today, the name Arthur Braykin will spread all over the south bank of the Red Fork River. A newly rising warrior, looking at Dylan who was beaten unconscious and couldn't stand and needed to be carried out, Kal blushed a little. After all, it was his knight who lost. The idea of taking Nadal and Wishu as his own sworn knight disappeared. Hendry's face was a little gloomy, and I don't know what he was thinking. Then, the acting mayor of Stonefence City stood up and announced that the 3rd game would be held soon. The night I designated is. He looked around, as if looking for a target. 40 or 50 noble knights also followed his gaze, and I don't know who will be chosen. Arthur walked to the wooden fence and asked the servant for a glass of wine. After 2 fights, he was sweating and had 2 small holes poked in his wounds. He urgently needed wine to relieve his thirst and relax his tense nerves. Knight Hans Derry. Hendry announced his favorite candidate. What? It's him, the man who tied Blackfish. Is he the cousin of William Derry, the coach of the Gold Cloaks? Yes, that's him, and the cousin of Viscount Raymond Derry. The audience whispered to each other. No one expected that Hendry would send such a well-known person. Raymond Derry was known to Arthur. He was the Lord of Derry City and a nobleman on the south bank of the Trident. Blackfish also knew Brynden Tully, Edgemuir's uncle and a famous knight in the river. He should be in the Eyrie in the Vale accompanying his niece Lysarin. The other 2 names sounded familiar to him, but he couldn't remember the corresponding characters. As for the Gold Cloaks, the law enforcement team of King's Landing should now number 1,200 people. He took the wine glass handed over by the servant and took the opportunity to ask, "Is William Derry the current coach of King's Landing?" The servant looked at him in astonishment and whispered, "Of course not. You don't even know him?" Arthur was very curious. "Who is he?" The servant looked around and then said mysteriously, "The coach of the Gold Cloaks of King's Landing during the Mad King's time. His sword skills were quite amazing. It is said that William Derry led the Sleeping Dragon Viserys to break out of the heavy siege of Dragonstone and headed for the continent of Essos." "What about Hans Derry?" The servant was not so shy about Arthur's new opponent and said openly, "It's this Derry's cousin, who is also famous in the Riverlands and King's Landing for his strong martial arts." Arthur nodded, indicating that he knew. The servant waited for a few breaths and saw that Arthur didn't reward him with a few copper coins or anything and didn't wait to take away the cup, so he turned around and left. Derry Castle is near the King's Road on the south bank of the Trident. Like Harrenhal, it is an important place in the capital region. The nobles there often like to interact with the nobles of King's Landing and the Crown. In fact, from the establishment of the Targaryen dynasty to the enthronement of Robert Baratheon, the relationship between the Iron Throne and Harrenhal has always been better than that of the Tully family guarding the river, the Deblebu family along the Red Fork River, the Vance and Piper families in the south, and the Tully family further west are a social circle that cannot be integrated into the circle in the east. Therefore, it is normal for the original owner not to know Hans Derry. Seeing the audience exclaiming, "This Hans Derry is very powerful," Arthur felt a little pressure. Henry heard the whispers of the audience and felt very satisfied. "I didn't expect that you, Henry, actually recruited a famous knight like Hans." Marquez seemed very excited. Compared with normal noble children, he has a love for martial arts that exceeds that of ordinary people. Kallal was also shocked. Hans is a man who can tie with blackfish. Isn't it too much of a bully to use him against Arthur? Henry enjoyed the surprised attitude of the two companions of similar status. Compared with the usual appearance of the two who had seen everything, the scene in front of him made him feel a little complacent. "It's not bullying. My distant cousin can beat the two knights you designated. He is a first-class master, right? It's just right to use Mr. Hans." Henry finished speaking, and without waiting for the two to express their opinions, he pretended to be generous and said to Arthur, "Cousin, do you need to change into a suitable armor? Yours looks a bit useless." Arthur was just looking forward to it. "It's better to find a mask or something. Take him to change." Henry waved to the servant and blinked his eyes very quickly. The servant understood what his master meant and knew that he was asking him to find an ordinary chainmail. So, Arthur followed Henry's squire to change his armor, while the well-informed nobles had already begun to spread the news of Hans Derry's achievements and discussed the next duel. It seems that Arthur is doomed to lose this time. That's right, Henry didn't even think about helping his relatives to mediate. If Arthur can beat Hans, wouldn't he become famous in one battle? Don't talk such daydreaming words. If Arthur Braykin can win this battle, I will lick your asshole. It's a deal. I guess I will have a double happiness. In the armory of Stonehenge City, Arthur looked at the set of chainmail selected by the squire and asked, "Is there no better one? You are tall. This is the only one you can wear." Arthur glanced at the squire suspiciously, guessed that this was Henry's order, and stopped making things difficult for him, and began to change on the chair. At the same time, he summoned a blue light curtain with his mind. Every time he swings his sword to kill someone, he gets 3 experience points. In addition, fighting also gives him 1 experience point. He should be able to reach level 3 now. After adding agility to his attributes, iron will be added to his skills, and two-handed weapons to his weapons. His stats are as follows. Baron, Arthur Braykin level 3 experience points. 1233/2200 strength. 16 agility. 11 intelligence. 7 charisma. 9 skills. Iron 4, power attack 7, power throw 1, power bow 1, weapon mastery 2, shield defense 0, running 0, riding 3, horse archery 0, looting 0, coaching 0, tracking 0, tactics 1, guiding 0, scouting 0, healing 0, surgery 0, first aid 0, engineering 0, persuasion 1, prisoner management 0, leadership 3, trading 0, weapon proficiency, one-handed weapon 74, two-handed weapon 105, pallium 77, bow 31, crossbow 31, throwing 31. He was a little confident that he could beat Hans Derry. P.S. I'm a new author and have a new book. Please collect it, recommend it, and give me monthly votes. I'll have 2 days off tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, so I can save some manuscripts and I won't publish them so late in the future. Chapter 15. This is called fighting. After changing into chainmail, Arthur put on the horse face mask custom made by Stonehenge, and then swung the sword a few times, feeling more comfortable. Sure enough, weapon proficiency can increase his mastery of the sword. This feeling is indescribable. To put it in an analogy, it is like the sword becomes an extension of the arm. Although Arthur's swordsmanship has not improved, the higher proficiency can make him use the weapon more flexibly. Confidence arises spontaneously. No matter who Hans Derry is, old Arthur, will kill him with one sword. The servant took Arthur back to the martial arts field behind the castle. At this time, a strong man with a grey beard was already standing in the field, wearing the more common silver plate armor produced in the West, without a mask or face armor. He was a head shorter than Arthur, with a significantly wider body, and looked burly and powerful. It seems that this is Hans Derry. In the War of the Usurper, the Derry family was a royal party, and worked hard for Prince Rhaegar. After Robert became king, he punished the royalist families such as Derry and Clinton, by reducing their fiefs and increasing taxes. Therefore, many high-paid knights from these families came out to make a living, to reduce the family's daily expenses. Hans Derry is such an example. Otherwise, with his ability, how could the Derry family be willing to let him go? Seeing Arthur entering the field, Hendry said with a little pride, "Dear Arthur, Mr. Hans is a superb martial artist. You have to be careful." Arthur thought about it, and realized that he still had 180 gold dragons to exchange, so he said, "Give my 180 gold dragons to the 2 soldiers I brought." Hendry was surprised and said, "Don't bet on yourself anymore. This time the odds are 1 to 1. Arthur firmly refused, no more bets. He was not a reckless man, and he still understood the principle of asset hedging. If he won, and borrowed 500 Bracken soldiers, he could completely confront Blackwood head on, and he would not be afraid of him at all. If he lost, at least he won some money, so it would not be a wasted trip. As for how to solve the problem of Blackwood and Brynden, it seems that we have to go to Riverrun, and ask Edgemure to deal with it. The only advantage of being in the Riverlands is that the feudal lord is a good person. As long as Edgemure Tully, the river guardian who is softer than his heart, comes forward, Arthur will have no problem keeping his territory. As for whether he can squeeze some money out of Brynden Blackwood, it is hard to say. Then let's get started. Hendry's tone became weaker. His view on this battle is consistent with that of most people. That is, Hans will win. This is reflected in the betting. That is, more people bet on Hans to win than on the field. After all, one is a long-established veteran warrior, and the other is just a rising star. This rising star has only won 2 games. In the audience, most people pumped their fists and cheered for Hans to cheer him up, while those who supported Arthur had almost no voice. In the field, I watched the first 2 games. You are a good seedling. If you have more skills and flexibility, you may be able to tie with me. This stern-looking knight commented on his opponent. The implication was that Arthur was no match for him now. Arthur shook his head. You should say it differently. What? Hans was puzzled. You should say that there are not many people in the world who can fight me on equal terms. Hans did not understand, shook his head, and stopped talking. He drew out his sword with a whoosh. Perhaps because he was concentrating on his opponent, Arthur felt that the action of drawing the sword actually made the sword vibrate and make a sound. Hans attacked first, and the 5-foot sword drew an extremely sharp arc, and attacked from the side under Arthur's left hand. This attack angle was quite tricky, and Arthur's sword could only block it, but could not use force to stop the attack. Fortunately, he had experience, holding the sword in his left hand, and taking a step forward, using his left thigh to push the sword against Hans's sword, and at the same time, his right hand swung fiercely towards Hans' chin. Who said that swordsmen can't hit people with fists? Hans took a step back to avoid the punch. The distance between the two was slightly widened. Arthur quickly swung the sword with his left hand and stabbed forward. Hans was a little surprised. How come you react so quickly? He had to dodge to the side, and at the same time, swung his sword at Arthur. I've always been this fast. I'm a fast man. Arthur changed his toes and heels slightly to adapt to the need for leg power, and then took the opportunity to block with his stabbing sword. Under the expectant eyes of dozens of spectators, the 2 swords rushed in both directions. The sound of metal and stone spread throughout the venue. Then Arthur took advantage of the situation and swung his sword to cut. Hans is not only skilled, but also very strong in pure strength. This kind of sword confrontation is not inferior to Arthur at all. Both of them showed an unstoppable momentum. Beheading the generals in the battle, suppressing the mountains and rivers is to describe such a scene. This is called fighting. Marquet opened his mouth slightly and sighed softly from the bottom of his heart. He has been completely attracted by the battle between the two. In just 1 round, the excitement of the changes in moves exceeded the sum of the previous 2 games. Hendry, who was sitting next to him, was incredulous. How is it possible? How can he take Hans's moves? He knew how strong Hans was. Whether in terms of skills or strength, He is the peak of the guest generals of Stonehenge City. I dare not say about other places, but at least in the Riverlands, there are only a handful of knights who can beat Hans. Although this is related to the fact that the Riverlands are not very martial, there is no doubt that Hans is strong. At least he is at the level of a first-class warrior in Westeros. If Henry was not the acting lord now, he would not be able to order Hans to fight for him. And Arthur, who was previously unknown, was able to fight with Hans to this extent. Even if he loses this battle, he will soon become famous in the Riverlands. And considering the possible tournament, such a strong warrior will be recruited and favored by many great nobles. It is just a favor for the great nobles to let the Blackwood family stop thinking about a few villages. Henry suddenly realized that he did not handle Arthur's request for help very well. Carol Vance looked at Henry's uncertain face, and his depressed mood, because of Dylan Wesh's defeat, suddenly improved a lot. After all, the man he chose lost, which was equivalent to telling others that his vision was not good and the knights under his command were not good either. It was still a bit embarrassing. If Arthur won, he would be the same as the two people around him, and others would look at him less strangely. There was another clang on the field, and the two men were entangled. Arthur knew that his combat experience was far inferior to others, so he used attack instead of defense, and chopped like a storm. Hans defended so well that no drop of water could leak out, and no needle could penetrate, or water could pour in. There were dozens of spectators, but fewer people cheered. Many people stared with wide eyes, watching Hans' textbook-level defense. Such on-site observation is an excellent learning opportunity for some lower-class nobles who cannot afford a good coach. Just like civilians have no way to systematically learn martial arts, lower-class nobles also lack resources in this regard. Unless he is the adopted son of a great noble, such as Petyr Baelish, a small noble from the Five-Finger Peninsula, who became the adopted son of Hoster Tully, the guardian of the river, he can enjoy the teaching of the coach of Riverrun. But obviously, Lord Baelish, nicknamed Littlefinger, did not learn any advanced martial arts. P.S. Some readers mentioned the issue of the gold dragon. I feel that my setting is not wrong. The exchange rate of 1 gold dragon for 210 silver deer is very inaccurate. In Martin's book, there are many basic currencies such as gold dragons, silver deer, silver moons, copper coins, copper half cents, copper stars, etc., and the exchange rates are different according to local prices. When the little devil hired the second sons, a sergeant was 100 gold dragons, an officer was 1000 gold dragons, and the captain was 100,000 gold dragons plus a castle and a noble title. You can refer to this price. I don't know the source of the saying that 700 gold dragons hired a small half of the golden group, but it is probably not true. The leader of the golden group is a descendant of Blackfy and has Targaryen blood. It's not that cheap. Finally, please recommend on monthly votes. Chapter 16 No soldier can die. You still have some problems with your pace, which will put you at a disadvantage on the battlefield. When both of them were exhausted and slowed down their movements, Hans Derry suddenly said this. Arthur was happy. Why did everyone want to teach him a lesson? The last person who pointed out his problem was still tied up in his castle. So what? As long as I'm strong enough, what opponent can take my sword? What's the use of flexible steps at that time? Hans took a step back and said to Arthur, while dancing with his sword to fight back, you are not the mountain. After all, your strength cannot increase infinitely. Young man, you should be humble and listen to the experience of the elders. Arthur wanted to refute, but he held back. Should I tell this middle-aged man that his strength can really increase infinitely? Let him remain ignorant. Ah, yes, you are right. Hans thought he listened to his advice and had a better impression of this young man. He was in the castle just now and didn't know why Arthur came or why the fight started. If it was just to cheer up the Brackens, Vances, and Pipers sitting in their seats, then he felt that he had to advise Lord Janis on how out of character Hendry was. It was just as absurd as King Robert who held tournaments or big hunts all day. So he asked, why did you fight this fight? To get Hendry to send troops, because he promised to give me 500 soldiers if I won 3 fights. Arthur answered with a strong chop. If the two were not fighting, this conversation would still be harmonious. Why send troops? Hans continued to ask. Because the Blackwoods sent troops to surround my castle and bully my people. Arthur changed the way he put it. As for the kidnapping of Lord Titus Blackwood's eldest son, he chose to ignore it. You sound like a good lord. Arthur was very satisfied with the praise. Yes, I'm fighting for my people. Hans quickly stepped back and temporarily left the battle. It sounds like I have stopped the reasonable demands of a righteous lord. Ah, yes. Arthur did not pursue him and took the opportunity to rest. After all, it is still very tiring to swing a big sword to chop. The two stood with their swords, staring at each other. In the audience, people who did not know what was going on quieted down, thinking that this was the quiet time before the decisive battle. It was like the darkest moment before dawn. Arthur thought that Hans was accumulating strength to prepare for a big chop, and he secretly became nervous. After all, a warrior with top strength and skills is not so easy to deal with. Just when Arthur raised his sword again, Mr. Hans suddenly said, I can't fight anymore, I surrender. When the people outside the field heard this, they looked at each other and did not react. Even the military officer referee was stunned. But soon, it became lively. Both the small nobles and the knights took the moral high ground and launched a fierce attack on Hans' Derry. Most of them thought that this was a trick. There were even a few people cursing, and it seemed that they had lost a lot. Marco Piper was confused. He was just getting excited when the battle suddenly ended. Henry did not expect such a situation. Although he won a lot of money as the banker, the idea of not wanting to send troops still disturbed his thinking. Carol Vance was a little relieved. Now the three of them were the same. Arthur was even more confused. He put down his sword awkwardly and watched Hans put away his sword and left. He didn't know what the middle-aged knight meant. After a long period of chaos, Henry announced that Arthur had won and added a condition for sending troops. As you can see, Mr. Hans did not use all his strength. That is, Arthur did not win completely. Although this is not in accordance with the agreement, I'm still prepared to send 500 soldiers to help Sir Arthur. But I have one condition. No one of these 500 soldiers can die. If there are any injured, the compensation and medical treatment should be borne by Sir Arthur Braykin and his family. Henry's speech has an extremely obvious aristocratic style. It seems that Arthur has breached the contract, and he continues to abide by his promise regardless of the loss. Arthur thought about it, and felt that he could accept it, but there was one thing he had to ask clearly, to avoid disputes in the future. What if a soldier died in the battle? Henry said without hesitation, that's easy. One soldier will compensate my family with 100 gold dragons. Arthur was a little confused. The ransom for a small noble is only 300 gold dragons. You want 100 gold dragons for one soldier. This is too much. If you don't like it, you can leave. Henry was unmoved. How could Arthur give up when the lifeline was right in front of him? How could I dislike it? Then we'll do as you say. When will we send out troops? Who will lead the troops? As one of the top 4 forces in the Riverlands, the main family of Braykin has about 3,500 standing troops, and there are about 1,000 near Stonehenge. If you want, set off now. 300 will be mobilized near Stonehenge, and the rest will be recruited along the way. As for the commander, I will appoint Knight Andrew Braykin, and you, Arthur, will also obey his orders when the time comes. Since he won a lot of money with Arthur, nearly 1,000 gold dragons, Henry did not make it difficult for Arthur on the issue of sending troops. There are still some Boo family soldiers stationed along the route to the north, and they can be recruited by the order of Stonehenge on the way north. Arthur was quite satisfied with this arrangement. Without further ado, after thanking Henry and Earl Janus, he and Andrew left the martial arts field and went to the barracks. The two soldiers who came with him also followed him. Andrew, with a round face and beard, of medium height, is a descendant of a branch of the main family of Braykin, and has been trained according to the standards of a senior military officer. In terms of status, Andrew is definitely not as good as Arthur, a minor noble, but in terms of actual power, Arthur is still not as good as him. Two life paths, it is hard to tell which is better or worse. Sir, how about you take a rest first? I think you are already very tired. Andrew also watched these 3 battles, and he recognized Arthur's strength very much, and there was a bit of flattery in his tone. No, I can rest soon. My people are still being bullied, and it doesn't matter if I get tired a little. Arthur pretended to be righteous and said. Andrew stood in awe. It's still a while before the afternoon. If we set off immediately, we can reach the vicinity of the river road before it gets completely dark. The river road is a road that runs from west to east through the riverland on the south bank of the Red Fork River. It is one of the 5 roads built during the reign of Arbitrator Jaehaerys. There, it is not far from the Red Fork River. Arthur nodded in agreement. Also, we can send out cavalry to notify the conscripted soldiers along the way in advance, which can save some time. Andrew suggested again. You are a professional commander, and you can arrange everything. Arthur was very satisfied with Andrew, and turned to think about how to sell Brynden Blackwood for a good price. P.S. Please recommend on monthly votes. Chapter 17 Planning. Andrew acted decisively and quickly. In just a short while, the 300 soldiers gathered and set off. What surprised Arthur was that among the 300 soldiers, there were only 230 combatants, and the remaining 70 were logistical personnel such as cooks and engineers. Of course, the soldiers recruited on the road were all warriors with swords. In other words, the 500 soldiers promised by Hendry were actually only 430. When asked, Andrew said that this was Hendry's intention. Moreover, the food and drink of these 500 people had to be settled in the end, and Arthur had to pay the money. Arthur suddenly had a new understanding of the shamelessness of the nobles. Moreover, these soldiers were wearing relatively cheap chainmail, which belonged to the low-end arms. The combat effectiveness was not very strong. But the good news is that the Blackwood family opposite also had the same equipment. The Westeros continent in the Game of Rights is generally a feudal monarch in the Middle Ages in Western Europe, but most of the daily necessities, weapons, and armor correspond to the Renaissance. In other words, iron armor is the mainstream soldier equipment, and chainmail is already relatively backward. For example, the Lannisters in the Westerlands, the main force is equipped with black armor, and the accessories are extremely coquettish red cloaks, and the helmets are all customized lion styles. They look very capable. In the Riverlands, only the elite troops of the great nobles such as Tully, Twabox, Free, Vance, and Piper can afford iron armor, and the helmets are round and uniformly produced by the Westerlands workshop. Most ordinary troops are round helmets, chainmail covering the torso, and leather arm guards and shoulder pads. Some may have hanging legs. As for cloaks, they are for the knights. In the poorer north, most of the soldiers are leather armor and iron helmets, and chainmail is only for elite troops. These 3 countries represent the equipment level of Westeros. In the Reach, led by the Tyrell family, the soldiers' equipment is slightly lower than that of the Lannisters, but higher than that of the Riverlands. The Stormlands of the Baratheon family are equipped with roughly the same equipment as the Riverlands. Dorne, which has the smallest population, has equipment that is on par with the North, but in order to dissipate heat, most of them are equipped with cloth armor. Leather armor is too hot to wear in the desert. The knights in the Vale are slightly different from the 6 countries mentioned above. Most of the knights wear plate armor, with white cloaks, which have a stronger visual impact than the Lannister army. The equipment is better than that of the Lannisters, but the number is much smaller. Of course, the Vale does not need too many warriors. The only way to reach the Vale on land is through the Bloody Gate, and the rest are blocked by the towering Moon Mountains. 100 crossbows are enough to defend the Bloody Gate. Thinking of this, Arthur felt that he should find a way to get some armor. It will only be a few months before the outbreak of the War of the Five Kings. If you want to make a name for yourself in this war that swept the 6 countries, excellent troops are indispensable. And excellent troops, in addition to strong recruits and a lot of training, also need sophisticated weapons and armor equipment. All of these can only be piled up with money. The good news is that the Mountain Blade system allows its own soldiers to bypass part of the training, and you can get experienced veterans by upgrading soldiers. The bad news is that Arthur has no money. The greatest wealth that belongs to him now is the 180 gold royals that he won in the bet just now. The 700 gold royals are probably not going to be found, and the 180 gold royals are equivalent to the breastplate of more than 30 sets of chainmail. To buy a full set of chainmail, including arm guards, shoulder pads, leggings, leather boots, etc., this amount of money is less than 20 sets. Better iron armor requires more gold royals. And you can't buy it immediately, even if you have money. 1 or 2 sets can be bought at the beauty market next to the Blue Fork River in the north. About 10 sets can also be provided by the big shops in King's Landing. Dozens of sets can only be made by the weapons workshop under the name of the Lannister family in the west, and it takes time to make them. Arthur estimated that, even if he had enough money to buy dozens of sets of iron armor, by the time he made them, the War of the Five Kings would just break out. So the Lannisters would just keep them for themselves. There are workshops in the Vale that make better plate armor, but most of them are on the east coast of the continent. It takes a month to place an order there. By the time it is made, the mountain has already destroyed the Red Fork River. Moreover, although the plate armor in the Vale is of excellent quality, the price is much higher. For poor Arthur, it is not cost effective. It is difficult. Arthur, who was riding a horse and following the main force, looked at the more than 300 soldiers and suddenly cursed himself for being stupid. The ready-made armor is right in front of us. Can't we buy the existing stock instead of the ones made by the Lannisters? If we can get a lot of gold dragons, armor and so on, it should not be difficult to find a great noble to buy dozens or hundreds of sets. The Tyrrell Rose family, the Hightower family, and the Redwine family in the Reach are all great nobles with nearly 10,000 soldiers. It is easy for them to get hundreds of sets of armor, as long as the price is high enough. Are you afraid that you can't buy it? But how to get the money? Brynden might not be able to sell for much money. If Earl Titus, the head of the Blackwood family, is furious, Edgemure will only try to smooth things over and ask Arthur to release the people and ask Blackwood not to invade Arthur's territory. Arthur thought about it for a while and felt overwhelmed, so he shook his head and put the matter aside. In addition to expanding the army, it is also necessary to strengthen the defense of the territory. Arthur can deal with the mountain by himself. If he can't beat him, he can hide in the castle. The small force of the mountain can't take down a solid stone castle, but there is no way to deal with the thousands of subjects. These subjects are Arthur's basic base in the early days, and they can't be abandoned. Arthur's castle is not very big, and it can't accommodate thousands of subjects like Tully's Reveron. After thinking about it, he still has to expand his own castle. It doesn't need to be built very strong or high, as long as it can withstand the impact of war horses. Coincidentally, the castle is on a small hill, which has a certain advantage of being high above. This matter doesn't cost much, and it can be carried out, as long as the people are mobilized. Arthur decided to let Jace and other village chiefs organize strong farmers to start working after he finished Brynden's affairs. As long as he can survive the period when the mountain plunders the Red Fork River, Arthur's territory will be safe. Because when the Lannister army entered the Riverlands in large numbers, only the east bank of the south and east banks of the Red Fork were disturbed by the war. Arthur's territory happened to be on the north bank of the Red Fork, and it was relatively peaceful. The east bank of the river was mainly the main family of Bracken, the Vance family of Drover's Rest, the Piper family of Pinktown, and the Hirenhal family of Hirenhal. After the war began, the Vance and Piper families, under Edgemure's orders, gathered 4,000 troops to block the Lannister army and prevent them from crossing the Red Fork River. Although Arthur felt that Edgemure's order was too saintly, he had a better impression of Edgemure when he thought that his territory was protected. P.S. New author, new book. Please collect, recommend and vote for me. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 18 My Lord, where are you? As a farmer from a riverside village, Darren never thought that he could spend the night in the Lord's castle. In the past, even if he looked at it from a distance, he would be scolded by patrolling soldiers. Although the soldiers' reason was to prevent people from sneaking in, after getting familiar with the castle, Darren stubbornly believed that this was the arrogance of the soldiers. Now I have also lived in a castle. This is Darren's first thought after getting up. Although he only made a big bunk on the ground and slept with many villagers, he felt that his life was almost perfect. If his pregnant wife gave birth to a son, he would have no regrets in his life. Darren's life is a typical life of a river farmer. When he was a child, he played in the countryside with his friends, who had no surnames. He did not receive the same education as the children of knights. They did not even have clothes that fit them. They were either too small or too big because he grew up too fast, and his parents had no money to buy him new clothes every once in a while. When he was able to pick up wheat ears, Darren began to work in the fields with his parents. Not only did he work on his own land, but also on the land of the Lord. When he was a child, he didn't understand why the Lord didn't have to work when they both owned land. Why did the Lord live in a beautiful castle? When he grew up, he understood that this was life. When he understood this truth, his parents found him a wife. She was also a wild girl from the next village, who grew up in the countryside like him. As a commoner, marriage only required a godfather to witness it, and there was no need to report to the citadel. Relatives helped build a few wooden houses, and he and his wife's small family was established. After marriage, he got a small piece of land from his parents. Although the food produced by this fertile land was enough to feed him and his wife, it was just enough to eat. If there was a child, there would be another mouth, and the small family would be broken. There was no way. His parents also had to eat, and they couldn't give him more land. Fortunately, there were enough small workshops in Aegean, which specialized in producing various small things for the nobles in King's Landing. So he joined a workshop and started working. He started saving money for the children who would join his family at some point in the future. Saving money would make the children live better in the future. Their workshop made wooden beds with exquisite reliefs. The skilled craftsman carved the beds in detail, and he and several villagers were responsible for helping. He couldn't imagine what kind of person would sleep on such a wooden bed that could be called a work of art. At least Darren would never sleep on such a bed in his life. The price of dozens of silver deer was not something a small farmer could afford. Every time a bed was made, he and 3 strong farmers carried it to the small dock of the village, and then carried it onto the boat that had been waiting there for a long time. It was a very large ship, the largest Darren had ever seen in his life. Then they got off the ship and watched it go away, heading for King's Landing, which Darren would never be able to visit in his life. It is said that the ship first went downstream along the Red Fork River, all the way to the mouth of the Trident River, then bypassed the Crabclaw Peninsula to the Narrow Sea, past Dragonstone Island to Blackwater Bay, and finally arrived in King's Landing. It is said that there are thousands of such ships in King's Landing, coming from different regions such as Old Town, White Harbor, Lannister Harbor, Gulltown, and even ships from free trade ports such as Pentus, Volantis, Mia, and Bravos across the Narrow Sea. These complex nouns were uttered by a certain master, and then took root in Darren's heart. He did not think about going to these towns and ports to take a look. He knew that it was impossible, but thought about remembering and telling his children in the future. Although they have not met yet. Thinking of his children, he thought of his newly bought axe. After being robbed by bandits, it was brought back by the Lord. He was going to buy the axe to chop trees. Chopping trees is to get wood, and the wood is used to make a small bed for the child. Darren also secretly learned some skills and thought that he could let the child sleep on a bed with exquisite reliefs. He made it himself. Darren could not make his own life better, but he could make his son's life better. Let his son receive a little education, and know at least more words than his own name. Let his son wear some decent clothes, and look respectable. Let his son know something about the outside world. Know that the Red Fork River is a tributary of the Trident River. Know how prosperous King's Landing is, and know that there are places like Pentus and Bravos. It would be better if his son could go to these places to play when he grows up. His son has been there, which is equivalent to him having been there. Come out, they are coming again. The soldier's shout interrupted Darren's reverie. He stood up, picked up his axe, and followed the soldier to the city wall with the villagers. Some of the soldiers of the Blackwood family left in the evening last night, and now they are coming again. It seems that they have captured someone. The soldier stood in front, and looked at it, and said to the farmers. Darren could not see what was happening under the city wall, because he was of low status, and could only stand at the back. Open the door quickly, or I will kill her. A rough voice came from the bottom of the castle. They captured a woman. The soldier continued. Your lord has run away, why don't you open the door? The rough voice asked. Don't open the door until he comes back. This is the order of the Lord. Grey Robe Amber replied. Darren recognized him. He was the steward of the Lord's castle. Sometimes he went to the village to collect taxes on behalf of the Lord. I don't want to fight, but you don't cooperate. If Master Brynden makes a mistake, my whole family will be in danger. We are all civilians. Why do you have to make things difficult for me? The rough voice continued to persuade them to surrender. Grey Robe Amber was unmoved. He turned around and gave orders, asking some people to go to the east and some to go to the south, with bows and crossbows. Half of the people took the order and left. The ground of this wall suddenly opened up. This is your choice, not my forced choice. The rough voice seemed quite impatient. Then there was a woman's scream. It seemed that this poor woman had suffered something terrible. Darren prayed for her silently. He was designated to stay here. After hearing the scream, he stepped forward and lay on the wall like the soldiers in Grey Robe Amber to watch. Susan, why is it Susan? Darren was instantly panicked when he saw it. The person tied up under the city was his 7-month pregnant wife, the honest Hegian woman. Let him go. Don't touch her. Darren shouted excitedly. The officer in silver chainmail, the owner of the rough voice, grinned after hearing this and brought down the whip he raised fiercely. Susan screamed again. Darren's heart also throbbed violently with the scream. He remembered the Lord who chopped down the bandit leader with 3 swords. If the Lord was here, these bastards would not dare to do this. Lord, where are you? P.S. Please recommend on monthly votes. Chapter 19. You'll know later. At this time, Arthur, who was missed by Darren, was crossing the river by boat with 500 borrowed soldiers. There was a passing cargo ship and 3 small boats owned by the main family of Bracken. They arrived at a ferry on the Red Fork River after dark last night and set up camp. Coincidentally, a cargo ship that traveled between King's Landing and the Riverlands was docked at the ferry, and the cabin was only half full. If these goods were freed up, there would be enough space for 360 soldiers to squeeze on. There were many small cargo ships belonging to Stonehenge City on the south bank, usually used to collect various handicrafts and carry people across the river that could be summoned. The large army was resting, and Andrew sent people to look for boats along the south bank, and finally found 3 larger ones that could allow the remaining 143 people to cross the river. Crossing the river directly can save time and keep the soldiers strong. If he took 500 soldiers around to the bridge on the west side and then went east along the river, it might take another day. This was very disadvantageous for Arthur. The Blackwoods might send more soldiers to retrieve their Earl's heir. Fortunately, his family's Raventree Castle is near the Blue Fork River, and it will take time for a large number of infantry to come. Compared with the Westerlands, the Riverlands have more powerful lords, and each family is equally powerful, so the Tullys cannot unify the Riverlands. The Yu family can't afford to have too many cavalry. Even the feudal lords don't have a large number of cavalry, so how can the lords under them have? According to Arthur's plan, after using the main family's soldiers to drive away more than 100 soldiers outside the family castle, he will take Brynden Blackwood all the way west along the Red Fork River to Riverrun, and keep the evidence that they pretended to be bandits, so that Edgemuir can do justice for Arthur. The eldest son of a second-class noble pretended to be a bandit. If it gets out, people in big places like King's Landing and Old Town will laugh to death. I think Earl Titus can't afford to lose this person. It is very likely to be dealt with privately at that time. Earl Titus gave Arthur a hush money to keep this embarrassing thing from spreading. This is also the best solution Arthur can think of at this time. In the final analysis, his power is too small. If Arthur had 1,000 soldiers, Brynden would not dare to play like this, even if he had 10 courage. This is a beautiful scenery. Andrew squeezed next to Arthur and said to the calm surface of the Red Fork River, "It's a pity that the beauty will not last for a few days." Arthur also sighed. There is a well-known crossroads in at the intersection of the lower reaches of the Red Fork River and the Trident River. It was there that Lady Catelyn Stark, after revealing her identity, summoned a group of passing river nobles and family soldiers to kidnap the little devil Tyrion Lannister. This incident, like her later letting Jaime Lannister go, can be listed as 2 stupid actions of Aunt Cat. Because her nickname is Cat, she is called Aunt Cat. The act of kidnapping the little devil instantly ignited the anger of Lord Tywin. Even though Robert was still alive at this time, Tywin had gathered tens of thousands of troops from the Westerlands, stationed in the south of the Riverlands from the Golden Road, and at the same time, sent the mountain Gregor Clegane to plunder the vast flat area from the Red Fork River to the God's Eye Lake. Arthur vaguely remembered that 3 Bracken soldiers also responded to Catelyn's call and followed the team that kidnapped Little Devil to the Vale. What's more, this team was attacked by the people of the Mountain Clan, and the 3 Bracken soldiers died before and after, and the sellsword Bronn was among them. After arriving at the Eyrie, the summer residence of the Lord of the Vale, Aunt Cat did not give enough rewards to the people who accompanied her. Catelyn's sister, the current controller of the Vale, Lyssa Arryn, did not express her opinion. The lucky Bronn turned against them and helped Little Devil win the trial by combat. After that, the two left the Eyrie, subdued the Mountain Clan on the way, and led them to the main army of the Lannister family. Afterwards, Little Devil, Bronn and the people of the High Mountain Clan served as the vanguard to fight against the 16,000 Northern infantry led by Rollos Bolton, the Old Skinner. If Aunt Cat had not kidnapped Little Devil, these things might not have happened. Of course, there will be chaos after King Robert's death, but there is no essential conflict between the alliance between the Riverlands and the North and the Lannisters, so they should not fight. The ones who should really fight are the Westerlands who support Joffrey, Dragonstone of Stannis, the Third Deer, and the Stormlands of Renly. Because these 3 families all claim to be the kings of the 7 kingdoms, and Wolf Stark only claims to be the king of the North. Your words are meant to be specific. Can you tell me more? Andrew asked, puzzled. I predict that there will be war in the Riverlands soon. Arthur suddenly felt that he should pretend to be a charlatan. He knew most of the plots later, and as long as he could predict a few, it would be easy for people to regard him as a true god walking on earth. This is a profitable business. Oh no, you can make money without any capital. You know, in the world of Game of Thrones, there are many nobles who do strange things to revive magic. The nobles' enthusiasm for magic and prophecy is unimaginable to ordinary people. For example, Egan V burned Duncan the Tall and Duncan the Short, as well as many courtiers, to death in Summerhall on the border of Stormland and Dorne, just to hatch dragon eggs with black magic. Duncan the Tall was a well-known knight, and Duncan the Short was the crown prince of Egan V. Another example is the familiar Queen Cersei, a famous beauty in the 7 kingdoms, not the middle-aged woman with a square, sallow face in the series, who got 3 prophecies from a witch with her bestie when she was a child. In order to cover up these 3 prophecies, Cersei killed her bestie, but the prophecy still came true. It is worth mentioning that the witch's granddaughter was the nurse that Robb Stark later fell in love with. As long as Arthur uses his understanding of Game of Thrones reasonably, there is no problem in being a charlatan. Andrew was very surprised. Why do you think so? The Blackwoods and we have been displeased with each other for thousands of years, but we have not been able to destroy each other. From a historical perspective, this incident is just a small matter. Arthur was happy. It turned out that Andrew thought that the war he predicted was a dispute between the 2 families of Brussels. This was too petty. He shook his head to express his objection. It's not that. In my dream, I saw a noble lady kidnapping the son of a feudal lord, which led to a war between the 2 countries. Moreover, I clearly saw that 3 Bracken soldiers died in this kidnapping case. The most important thing about pretending to be a charlatan is that it is vague, but has a strong direction. This description seemed clear enough afterwards, but now it is a hazy picture. Do you dream often? Andrew was even more confused. The son of a feudal lord was kidnapped, which was a big deal. Moreover, there were not many feudal lord sons in the 7 kingdoms who could come to the Riverlands. After counting, only Edgemere came often. Arthur smiled mysteriously. Believe it or not, you will know in about 2 or 3 months. P.S. The prequel to Ice and Fire is so hard to read. I spent the whole day reading it and was almost confused by all the people with the same name. Please recommend and vote for me. Chapter 20. Take it seriously. After arriving at the small ferry at the riverside village, the soldiers lined up to get off the boat, and Arthur paid the boat owner for the fare. The boat owner symbolically charged 50 silver deer as freight. Originally, hiring such a boat would cost far more than 50 silver deer, but the boat owner insisted on charging only this much, saying that it took very little time, so he would charge less. Arthur and Andrew both expressed their gratitude, which made the boat owner very happy. His boat regularly runs the route from the upper reaches of the Red Fork River to King's Landing, and it is necessary to build a good relationship with the landlord Braykin. This time it only took half a morning to gain the friendship of the senior officers and the small lord of the Boo family, which is still worthwhile. After seeing the Braykin flag with golden shields and horses and Lord Arthur, the farmers of the riverside village ran out to offer some fruits and food. They also reported that the Blackwood soldiers took away several women and the family of the village chief Jace. The soldiers happily accepted the food, and Arthur was worried about the people who were abducted. Soldiers, in most periods and planes, are synonymous with bandits. It would be bad if they fell into his hands. After a simple meal, the soldiers gathered and lined up, and Arthur led them to set off. The family castle was not far to the east of the riverside village, and it was estimated that it would be noon when they arrived. Arthur had no idea how to deal with it. Andrew also said to act according to circumstances. Arthur wanted to discuss countermeasures with him, but Andrew was intrigued by Arthur's prophecy and kept guessing which lady had kidnapped Edgemere. And he was also guessing which 3 unlucky people died in this incident. Seeing his slightly playful look, Arthur knew that he didn't believe it. But Arthur didn't care. Instead he encouraged him to tell this as a joke to all the Braykin soldiers he knew. A few months later, this was no longer a joke, but another correct prophecy uttered by Arthur. The reason why it was said another case was because Arthur thought of a source of money. There were a lot of people in King's Landing who believed this. It only took 3 or 4 days to ride a horse from here to the capital. Find an opportunity to go there and pretend to be a charlatan to make money. Sir, a large number of Braykin soldiers are coming from the east, estimated to be thousands. A sentry reported. Santaga put down the whip and looked at the 3 corpses in front of him with a glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. He has a hobby of torturing people, but due to his low status, this hobby can only be hidden deep in his heart. He never dared to show it. This time, taking advantage of Brynden being tied up in this small castle, he released his suppressed heart a little. If there were not so many subordinates around him, he would have shouted out excitedly. This kind of excitement was enough to paralyze his nerves, so after hearing the report, it took him several full breaths to react to what it meant. You mean thousands of Braykin soldiers? He showed doubt on his face. How is this possible? Not to mention the time of assembly. How can their ships transport so many people? The sentry knew that his lie would not work, but he really saw hundreds of soldiers. He lied just to get the commander to order a retreat. Maybe a little less, but there is indeed a large force approaching. Should we consider avoiding their front? The sentinel replied cautiously, trying not to make his superior Santaga angry. The sentinel's suggestion did not work. Santaga was in high spirits. You must have seen it wrong. There are not so many people. Santaga shouted loudly, call the people guarding the other gates. Let's go to meet them, and let them know the significance of Blackwood. But Master Brynden is still in the castle. Someone reminded him. Santaga thought of the willful young master who did not listen to his advice, and the Brynden who only listened to his distant cousin, so he let him pay for his willfulness. They will not kill the young master. This is the tradition of treating great nobles. Santaga said. Someone else reminded him, if they take the opportunity to escape. Isn't that just right? You can't run too far on the plains. Santaga interrupted his subordinate rudely. Just do as I said, and teach Braykin a lesson. So no one dared to question it anymore, and 150 soldiers quickly assembled and set off, and several hostages were also taken away. Not far away, the 2 armies met. Damn sentinel, why didn't you remind me that there were so many of them? Seeing the hundreds of people on the opposite side, Santaga was terrified and afraid, and even a little angry. Angry that the sentinel didn't tell the truth. The sentinel didn't dare to run to Santaga at this time, and replied from a distance, I told you. Santaga didn't have time to get angry at the sentinel, and saw a man on the opposite side riding a horse forward. The horse walked slowly, carrying the man closer. The man had a handsome temperament, a straight nose, thin lips, bright eyes and white teeth, and a tall figure. Except for being a little thin, there were no flaws. If he wasn't wearing an extremely ordinary chainmail, Santiago would definitely think that this was the heir of a top noble family. It was really dazzling. "You are the one who kidnapped my people." The man spoke, looking arrogant like a king. Santiago thought for a long time before realizing that this was Arthur Braykin, just a small noble. "It's me," Santiago replied. The army of hundreds of people finally made him sober up a little, and he thought about how to lead decently. A head-on conflict was impossible. With the limited number of troops he had, the battle could be over in less than a meal. At least 4 against 1, and they were all full-time soldiers in armor. How could they win? "How are they?" Arthur asked. Santiago thought for a moment and answered truthfully, "Since your men did not open the castle door, I killed 3 of them in order to force them to open the door, and tied up the rest. I will report this to Lord Edgemure and Eucosta, and do what they want." Arthur paused. "Now, shall we discuss how to deal with the current situation? You kidnapped my young master Brynden, and I will report this to Eucosta as well." Santiago was not inferior to others in momentum. Arthur smiled. "You are an ordinary soldier. Can you get in front of the Duke? Are you qualified to talk about reporting?" Santiago did not want to entangle with him on this issue. He just wanted to take his men away. As for Brynden, let Earl Titus worry about it himself. "Yes, I'm not worthy. How about this? I will take my men away, and we will each report this to the higher authorities." Arthur snorted coldly. "Come as you like, leave as you like. Do you think the 1,000 soldiers behind me are vegetarians? There are not 1,000 at all." Santiago corrected. He estimated that there were only about 500 people. Arthur's face was not red when his lie was broken. "Some are on the way. We have so many soldiers that several ships can't accommodate them at one time. There are only these 500 soldiers. If one of them dies, he will have to pay 100 gold dragons." Arthur felt a little bit like a good cook cannot cook without rice. "Let's do this. I don't want to embarrass you ordinary soldiers." Arthur said one thing and meant another. In fact, he really wanted to chop down these people to gain experience. "How about you send one person to compete with me? If I win, you surrender. If you win, I will let you go." Santiago heard this and suddenly became a little excited. Really? Why are these nobles always used to being in the limelight? Did he think that he, with his skinny appearance, could beat a veteran like himself who had been a soldier for more than 10 years? Arthur was also a little happy. Finally he didn't have to worry about the dead Braykin soldiers. Really? P.S. Please recommend and vote for the monthly ticket. Thanks to the friends who voted at this time. I will summarize it on Friday and send the thank you list. Chapter 21 Two Things. Arthur dismounted and signaled his soldiers to hand over his greatsword. Although this sword is a so-called ancestral greatsword, it is not durable. After only 3 or 4 fights, the blade is already full of pits, and it seems to be shaking in the sun. When I have money, I will get a Valyrian steel sword. Although the Valyrian steel swords in the Game of Thrones world sound very dire, there are actually a lot of them. The Mormonts of the Bear family, who are so poor, have a Valyrian steel sword called Longclaw, not to mention other big families with a long history. The dagger used to assassinate Bran belonged to King Robert and was casually taken away by Joffrey the Great and given to a passerby killer. It can be seen that some people really don't care about this thing, but those who don't have it want it very much. Littlefinger's claim that the dagger was his was obviously a lie. When Jaime was around, Little Devil always bet on Jaime to win, but Eddard and his wife didn't even hear that. The Lannisters didn't have it, because during the Casterly Rock era, Tommen II took the family heirloom light whale to play at sea. He disappeared on the way, and the sword was lost with him. It is known that there are more than 200 Vasteel swords in Westeros, so it is still easy to get them. Santiago took his sledgehammer from his subordinates and sneered. "I hope you don't cry for mercy when the time comes. I hope your hammer is as hard as your mouth." Arthur took the sword in one hand and strode forward. Santiago grinned at the subordinates around him, and they laughed too. Because winning or losing looks obvious. Santiago became the captain of Blackwood's personal guards by virtue of his strength, while the little lord opposite him, except for his handsome face, didn't seem to have anything to show for himself. Some Braykin soldiers were whispering in the back, "Isn't this Lord Arthur too extravagant? I think too, that it's more likely to let Andrew win than him." Maybe it's a common problem among nobles. They like to show off. You don't understand this. A soldier said sarcastically. This is Lord Arthur's wisdom. What do you mean? Someone asked curiously. As long as Lord Arthur loses, can he let them go openly? Lord doesn't want to offend Blackwood. We are not always on the north bank, but the other side is. These soldiers did not watch Arthur's fight in the martial arts field of Stonefence City, otherwise they would not have said such words. Arthur, the real owner, heard the latter part of the words and didn't care. How could these soldiers know that he was trying to prevent them from being sacrificed? Santiago was ready, holding a hammer in both hands, and walked towards the pretty boy he thought was. Arthur noticed that the hammer in his hand was slightly larger than his fist, and suddenly felt a little distressed about the sword in his hand. This kind of big sword is cheaper than armor, but it also costs 2 or 3 gold dragons. If it was bent by the hammer, he would not be able to find a suitable replacement for a while. The half-handed swords equipped by normal soldiers were too small and too light. They would break after 2 swings. They were not suitable for a power player like him. Arthur was thinking that the sledgehammer could not touch the sword. Santiago swung the sledgehammer towards Arthur, and the poor little lord had to dodge. But Santiago's attack was fast and accurate, and Arthur dodged repeatedly. This made the Blackwood soldiers boo loudly. Some of the Bracken soldiers also laughed secretly. Andrew turned back and glared at them for a few times, which made the rear quiet down. Hey, Kit, is all you can do to dodge? Pick up your sword and fight me for a few rounds. Santiago saw Arthur dodging so skillfully and deliberately provoked him. Otherwise, he could not hit Arthur, and when his physical strength was exhausted, he would lose. As you wish. Arthur rushed forward in the face of Santiago's latest attack. But he did not use the sword, but caught the hammerhead with his hands in leather gloves. The family heirloom sword was thrown to the ground by him. Seeing this, the Blackwood soldiers laughed even more happily. Comparing strength with Santiago, who was using a hammer, isn't this like looking for shit in the toilet? Santiago grinned. You chose it yourself. The situation developed better than he expected. This pretty boy actually threw away his sword and wrestled with him. He could already imagine Arthur being pinned to the ground and begging for mercy. At that time, he could hold this little lord hostage, or leave, or replace that big villain Brynden. So he exerted force in his hands, trying to achieve success in one fell swoop. Die. The Blackwood soldiers also cheered Santiago loudly, as if victory was just around the corner. However, Santiago used all his strength, but the scene he imagined did not appear. On the contrary, the pretty boy was calm and composed. Is this your ridiculous strength? Arthur taunted him fiercely. Then he exerted force from his calves to his waist, and then to his upper arms at the same time, and actually lifted the hammer and Santiago up. Then he grabbed the sturdy man's waist guard with his right hand, and lifted him up to his head. Santiago was unable to use any strength, and shouted in panic, how can this be possible? How can you lift something heavier than yourself? Most of the Blackwood soldiers were also shocked, and could not believe what they saw. Santiago, who was famous for his strength, was actually lifted up. Apart from the legendary Demon Mountain, is there really a human with such strength? Even Andrew, who had seen the fighting in the martial arts arena, was deeply shocked at this moment. Lord Arthur actually has such divine power. The Bracken soldiers behind him were speechless. Some soldiers were ashamed of their superficial views. This handsome little nobleman is really powerful. After Arthur lifted Santiago over his head, he threw Santiago hard on the ground covered with grass. Fortunately, the ground was soft, and Santiago secretly thanked himself for not falling badly. But the next second, he didn't think so. A black shadow rode on him. Do you know what my 2 favorite things are? Arthur asked. Santiago twisted like a maggot, trying to break free, but the body on his body seemed to be cast in iron, and did not move at all. After trying for a long time, Santiago felt that he could not get away, so he smiled and replied, I don't know your hobbies, but I absolutely respect you. Riding a horse and beating people. Arthur took off Santiago's mask, and swung his right fist to hit him. Just right. I think you can enjoy both. Then, Santiago's screams spread throughout the venue. A rough and sturdy man, after being beaten hard by a fist, his screams turned from rough to shrill. The soldiers of the 2 families around firmly believed that they would never dare to fight Arthur Bracken head on in the future. How terrifying it is for a man who can lift an adult man and beat him to a deformed voice. It is estimated that only the legendary mountain can withstand such a punch. Arthur beat Santuga until he couldn't even hum, and then he stood up. He picked up Santuga's sledgehammer and asked more than 100 Blackwood soldiers, "Do you want to be gently caressed by this sledgehammer or surrender to me? P.S. Newcomer new book. Please collect, recommend, and vote for me." Chapter 22 Journey to the West. The Blackwood soldiers were very clever. Most of them turned around and ran away without looking back. They left behind a bound prisoner and Santuga lying on the ground groaning. Andrew was about to order a pursuit, but Arthur raised his hand to stop him. "Why? We have enough advantages." Andrew was puzzled. "Let's take Brynden to Riverrun as soon as possible," Arthur explained. This was done to prevent Earl Titus, the head of the Blackwood family, from sending a large army to pursue Arthur. Arthur's 35 armored soldiers and more than 20 peasant soldiers could not stop the thousands of troops from Raventry. You know, both sides of the Blackwood maintained a standing army of more than 3,000 people, and a vast land from the Blue Fork River in the north to the north bank of the Red Fork River. Most of it belongs to the Blackwood family. Some of it belongs to the Tully family. But considering that the Red Fork River and the Tengshi River further west divide the Tully family's territory into 3 parts, it is hard to say whether the Tully family can defeat the Blackwood family on the north bank of the Red Fork. But as long as they enter the Tully's territory in the west, I think Titus will not dare to use force on the feudal lord's territory at will. Then show Edgemure the evidence and let him do justice. Andrew scratched his helmet, "But Lord Henry didn't order us to follow you to Riverrun. I will pay him a large sum of gold dragons as a reward for borrowing you. In addition, everyone present will be given 3 silver deer each." After hearing that they could get 3 silver deer, the Bracken soldiers were immediately excited. "We are all Brackens. Lord Henry will agree." "That's right, Andrew. You are just a knight. How dare you refuse Lord Arthur's request? Isn't it just going to Riverrun? We will go with you. The Tullys are hospitable. There is nothing wrong with going. These soldiers are civilians in the Riverlands, many of whom have no land at all, and join the army, and they only get 4 or 5 silver deer a month. Just going to Riverrun can get 3 silver deer, which is simply pie in the sky. In fact, this situation of maintaining a large number of standing armies only occurs in the Riverlands and the Reach controlled by the Tyrrell Rose family. Because the 2 places are the second and first grain producing areas of the 7 kingdoms, respectively, there is enough food to feed the extra population. In addition, the warm climate is suitable for reproduction, and the uneducated farmers do not know birth control, which leads to a large population growth in peacetime. Robert has been king for 15 years, and a new round of population growth is about to begin. Unfortunately, the long summer that has lasted for nearly 10 years is about to end, and the contradiction between food and population will be infinitely magnified. By then, even if Robert is not dead, Westeros will be in chaos for a while. During the Targaryen dynasty, there were many years of war with Dorne and several Blackfire rebellions, which could consume the excess population. To ensure that after the long summer, Westeros's food reserves could allow the remaining people to eat until the next summer. It is worth mentioning that the Brackens are the main supporters of Daemon Blackfire, the illegitimate son of the Targaryen family, the so-called Black Dragon Party. Faced with the enthusiasm of the soldiers, Andrew could not refuse. Anyway, Arthur explained to Henry and Earl Janos that he was just an executor. Andrew convinced himself in this way. After tying up Santuga and releasing the captives, more than 500 people lined up and set off. Soon, Arthur's castle appeared in front of them. Several people were lying on the ground, and a farmer-looking man was hugging someone and crying loudly. The butler Amber and some peasant soldiers stood aside. The horse trotted and brought Arthur to the front. He recognized that this was Darren, a villager from Riverside Village, who had followed him to capture Brynden and his gang yesterday. The 3 people on the ground seemed to be dead. There was not even a piece of good meat on their bodies. They must have suffered a lot before they died. The one Darren was holding was a young woman with a conspicuous bulge in her belly. In addition to the skin that was beaten to pieces, a lot of blood flowed between her legs. It was obviously a miscarriage. 7 layers of hell. Arthur exclaimed loudly. "Did that officer Blackwood do this?" Darren cried and couldn't speak. Umber replied with some guilt, "Yes, my lord. I'm ashamed that I failed to protect your people when you were out. I'm not a good steward." "It's okay." Arthur comforted him. Looking at the grief-stricken Darren, Arthur felt a little sad. He jumped off his horse, walked up to Darren, and said, "I'm ashamed that I failed to protect you and your family. I swear, the Blackwood family will pay the price for this. The honest villagers of this riverside village should have had their own little lives, maybe not very happy, but there is also a goal. Just because of Bryndon's act of pretending to be a bandit, 3 families were broken. This is not a villager who can be robbed at will in Mount and Blade. This is a living person. Maybe it's a wife, maybe a daughter, maybe a mother. In short, she is a person with a certain social relationship. Just like this, she was abused to death." Arthur began to hate Bryndon and the officer. "Amber, go and bring Bryndon and his men out. I will take them to see Duke Hoster and let him deal with this matter fairly," Arthur ordered. "Darren, are you willing to go to Reverin to testify? The Duke will give you an explanation." Arthur bent down and asked. Darren wiped his nose and looked at Arthur blankly. I'm willing, but can I bury my wife and children? They are evidence. We have to take them to Reverin." Arthur whispered, "We can wrap your wife and children with salt so that they will not rot quickly." Darren's eyes were empty, and he neither nodded nor shook his head. Arthur thought he should agree, so he ordered the servants in the castle to take out salt and deal with the 3 bodies. In addition, some soldiers of the master's family were also sent to carry food. It takes 2 or 3 days to walk from here to Reverin, and it is not possible without enough food. Fortunately, there is enough food stored in Arthur's castle. After instructing Amber to continue guarding the castle, Arthur set off with the criminals, captives and 500 soldiers. Their destination was Reverin at the confluence of the Red Fork River and the Tengshi River. "Raventree, my lord, Master Bryndon has been kidnapped by Arthur Braykin of the Red Mill. The sentinel who escaped ran the fastest and ran back to Raventree early the next morning to report the incident to Earl Titus. Where are the soldiers around my son? Where is Sentagar? Where is Roger? Are they good for nothings? More than 100 people can't beat a small red mill." The Lord Earl was furious. The sentinel didn't dare to tell the fact that Bryndon pretended to be a bandit, so he had to be vague. They were all captured. The remaining brothers saw that the situation was not right, so they all came back to report to you like me. They are all on the way now. What a waste. Get out. The Lord Earl obviously didn't believe this statement. He stood up suddenly, paced back and forth in the hall, then ordered the terrified steward beside him, "Gather all the soldiers near Crow Tree City. Let's go find my son. P.S. Please give me monthly votes and recommendation votes." Chapter 23 "I'm going to tear your head off, and you sit as a bowl." One day later, Stonehenge. "I heard that you sent 500 soldiers to help Arthur drive away the Blackwoods from his territory?" Earl Janis asked. He has the common black-brown hair of the Bracken family, a slightly bald head, a round head and a round face. He looks about 50 years old. His serious expression makes him look very honest and straightforward, but the cunning light flashing in his eyes from time to time reveals some of his characteristics. "Yes, in order to reduce the loss, I asked him to guarantee to pay 100 gold dragons for each soldier who died." Hendry answered truthfully. He has a facial contour similar to his uncle, but there is an unconscious arrogance on his face. Not long after Arthur left the day before yesterday, he and his companions finally gathered together and then went to the south to hunt for fun. They were very happy along the way. They loudly discussed the territory, famous nights, the 281-year Hirennal tournament, where female workers are more profitable, and other topics that young people would care about. Until yesterday, his uncle sent someone to chase him back. Janis nodded. "This is a good idea, but Arthur is not an outsider, so there is no need for this." The Earl decided to teach his nephew the precautions of being a lord. He could not pass Stonehenge Castle to one of his daughters. There was an example of a woman in charge in Hirennal, where the river house had already declined. His only nephew was his choice. First of all, a small branch family like Arthur must be helped, and unconditionally helped, because on the one hand, it is necessary to show outsiders that we Bracken are worth following. He paused and poured a glass of River Bay wine. Secondly, such a vassal has its meaning of existence. The layout of our ancestors for thousands of years is not without reason. Janis especially likes the word thousands of years, as if this can separate his family from emerging families such as Tully and Free, and gain a sense of superiority. Henry was a little confused. Arthur's territory only has 9 villages. It's really not worth fighting for them. Why? No reason. Janis suddenly raised his voice, as if he was dissatisfied with his nephew's questioning. When you take over my position, you will know how lucky we are to have a ferry and a place to stay on the north bank of the Red Fork River when fighting with that old man Titus. Seeing Henry nodding, Janis felt a little satisfied. But, it's just to help Arthur not be killed by Titus and others. It's a bit too much for you to send 500 soldiers this time. He changed his tone. We will send as many people as Blackwood does. In this case, more than 100 people will be enough. After all, Arthur is not very close. Henry nodded again to show that he remembered it. Janis took a sip of wine and couldn't think of what to say, so he asked casually, what was the reason this time that the old man sent people to surround Arthur's castle? Henry thought for a moment and said, it seems that Brynden ran to his territory and did something, so he was kidnapped by him. Janis was stunned with his wine glass. Which Brynden? The Blackfish from the Tully family? The eldest son of Titus from the Blackwood family. Henry replied. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Janis stood up, and some wine spilled out of the wine glass, because of the violent movement. For such things, you have to send a raven to Reveron, and tell me, as soon as possible. He looked excited. Arthur is really my nephew. I didn't even kidnap the eldest son of the old man, which really makes me proud. Henry was confused by his uncle's inconsistent attitude, but he didn't dare to ask more. Janis wandered around the hall for a few circles, and finally made up his mind. How can 500 soldiers be enough? I will take another 1,500 people to Crowtree Castle, to fight with the old man. Henry felt that it was not appropriate and advised, wouldn't this be a bad idea? What if Blackwood retaliates against us in the future? The 50-year-old Earl Janis said excitedly, my Bracken family can kidnap his son, but he can't kidnap my son. Who made me have no son? This made Henry feel uncomfortable, but he didn't show it. Janis did what he said, and immediately summoned the butler and the coach of Stonehenge Castle to give orders. After a simple assignment of tasks, Stonehenge Castle, which had not seen war for many years, took action. The messenger crows and cavalry were sent out to gather troops and fares, and the Earl led the advance army to the river. One day later, looking at the dense flock of crows surrounding the flag of the weirwood in front of him, Arthur felt his scalp tingling. When they were about to reach the territory of the Tully family, they were blocked by a Blackwood army. Most of the soldiers on the other side were ordinary soldiers wearing standard chainmail, but there were also elite troops equipped with iron lamellar armor and plate armor. The dozens of people leading on horseback were wearing Blackfish scale armor. This is a variant of scale armor, which uses the same binding method as Roman chainmail, reducing the chance of armor decaying due to moisture. This kind of scale armor is only worn by a few nobles in the Riverlands, because it has to be customized from a workshop in the Westerly territory, and is very expensive. It looks like there are thousands of people. Andrew said in a low voice, how about we hand over Brynden? It sounded like he didn't want to fight. How can this be done? Arthur couldn't tell whether he wanted to get some gold dragons from Brynden, or wanted to give an explanation to Darren's wife. In short, it was impossible to hand over Brynden and his followers. Even if the soldiers who might die after the war could make him lose everything, he still felt that he should fight. Besides, it's not that there is no change. Not far to the west, several patrolling soldiers of the Tully family on horseback were watching. The two Brackens combined made a big move of more than 2,000 people, and it was right on the edge of the Tully territory. Reveron could not have failed to react. If the Tully ships arrived quickly, the Tully army would arrive here soon after the two families started fighting. When the feudal lords intervened, unless Blackwood didn't want to get married, he would have to stop and negotiate. In the Blackwood team. Very good. It seems they are ready to fight. Earl Titus was very angry. He ordered, go and tell Arthur Bracken that I want to twist his head off, and you sit as a bull. The messenger received the order, and shouted at the Bracken team. Arthur sneered and replied loudly, it depends on whether the greatsword in my hand agrees. I will make your heads disappear from your shoulders. Andrew saw that his loss of composure was irreversible, so he had to smile and ordered the Bracken soldiers to line up and prepare to meet the enemy. Titus was even more angry when he saw that the more than 500 people on the opposite side dared to fight, so he ordered a charge. You will fight against the enemy's 1,300 people with 501 troops, the blue light screen reminded in time. Although Arthur felt that his side was at a disadvantage, there was still a chance of winning. It's just a fight. I'm happy to play along. P.S. Please give me a recommendation and monthly vote. Chapter 24 Hammer God. What? My nephew has already fought with old Titus? Earl Janis asked in disbelief after hearing the Sentinel's report. After they set out yesterday, they first went upstream to land on a flat river beach that was not well monitored by Blackwood, and then marched quickly along Arthur Andrew's route, and finally caught up with him in the afternoon of the second day. Yes, the two sides have already started fighting. At present, Sir Andrew and Lord Arthur are struggling to hold on, and the soldiers of the Tully family are also gathering, and it seems that they are ready to stop the fight. The Sentinel reported quickly. Janis nodded and sent the Sentinel away. Then he ordered the army to speed up. Hans Derry, the Free Knight, followed him and suggested, "My lord, the battlefield is only half a day's journey away from here, but if we speed up, the soldiers will be very tired when they arrive. It is better to move slowly and save energy so that we can fight more effectively." Janis thought for a while. The Blackwood soldiers are also fighting and will be more tired than us. If we go a little later, Brynden will be taken back by them. What's the point of mobilizing troops? Janis has made up his mind to get Brynden, and he will not take anyone's advice to heart at this time. Besides, they have 1,500 people, which is an advantage over the Blackwood family's 1,000 soldiers reported by the Sentinels. The army implemented the Earl's will and accelerated towards the battlefield. At this time, on the Tully family's merchant ship upstream of the Red Fork River. Why do you think they started fighting? Edmure was very distressed. Lord Janis just visited his sick father. He was very normal at that time. He is the eldest son of the River Guardian Duke Hoster and the uncle of Robb Stark. The incident happened suddenly. In order to transport enough soldiers to separate the two families, they had to use merchant ships to transport soldiers. Maybe they are too idle. Desmond Grell, the coach of Riverrun, answered casually. Edmure was worried. They fought like this because they think I am too young and can do whatever I want. He always felt that the lords under him looked down on him, and his father was seriously ill. The burden of the Tully family was actually handed over to him. Desmond advised, that's not the case. Although you are young, you still have prestige. From Maidenpool to Pink City, which river people don't think you are magnanimous? Although he said this, the middle-aged strong man still complained in his heart. You also know that you are young. Are we almost at the battlefield? How's the battle going? Edmure sat on the deck for a while before he remembered to ask about the battle situation. The Blackwoods have the advantage in manpower, but the Brackens are fighting very hard. It's hard to say who has the upper hand. Desmond replied. As a coach and commander, he actually knew that the Brackens had fallen into a trap this time. After all, one side had a few hundred people and the other side had thousands of people, which was nearly 1 to 3, and they all had similar armor and weapons. There would be no suspense about the outcome of the battle. So he hoped that the speed of the ship would be fast enough. As long as the Tully soldiers and Edmure arrived, Blackwood would not dare to force his way in. By then, there might be a few people left in the Brackens. How should I rule then? Edmure turned to look at the coach. This is also the first time I have dealt with such a conflict among vassals. I don't know how to handle it. There are conventions to follow for this kind of thing. After all, the two Tullys have been fighting for thousands of years. Whoever invades whose territory first will be asked to pay some gold dragons. In addition, the two Tullys will each compensate the other for the loss of their army. Edmure was not sure. Is it just a punishment of some gold dragons? Isn't it too light? Robert was so lenient, but it still reduced the territory of House Derry. Desmond said firmly, no. All the families in the river know that the two Tullys are incompatible. Whether they openly disobey the orders of House Tully, there is no need to punish them too severely. Hearing the coach's words, Edgemure had a bottom line in his heart, so he stopped talking and waited quietly for the boats to transport them to the battlefield not far downstream. Soon, the fleet carrying nearly 1,000 Tully troops arrived at the battlefield downstream. There was no ferry, so the soldiers had to jump into the river and then walk ashore. Edgemure and other noble knights were much better. They were carried ashore by others, so their legs were not wet at all. At this time, the battle had entered a white-hot stage. Although there were few visible people in Bracken, a tall warrior was extremely brave and carried a sledgehammer. He could knock down a Blackwood soldier with one hammer, and often his armor and flesh were torn. Desmond estimated that in just a short time on the shore, this warrior had killed more than 20 soldiers. He is really invincible. There is such a person in Bracken. Desmond sighed and then ordered the soldiers to shout and stop fighting. In some places, where the battle was not very intense, fully armed Tully soldiers entered in large numbers, trying to separate the soldiers of the two families. After a long time, the two armies finally stopped fighting each other. Desmond loudly rebuked, "What are you doing? Don't you know that Duke Hoster has issued an order that vassals are not allowed to attack each other?" Then he asked the Tully soldiers to drive the survivors of the two families together and began to clean up the battlefield and treat the wounded. The Blackwood soldiers gradually approached the nobles, and Earl Titus was protected among them. Seeing the obviously reduced number of soldiers, the Earl actually felt a little fear. Only half of the 1,300 soldiers were left, and nearly half of the casualties were caused by that man. That man, the man who cut off his sword and replaced it with a sledgehammer, actually killed hundreds of soldiers by himself, which frightened him to the point of weakness. He also led his army to participate in the battle between Prince Rhaegar and Robert on the Ruby Shoal. Robert, the bravest of the Seven Kingdoms, did not give him such a visual experience. With one hammer, a normal soldier wearing an iron helmet would burst out with white slurry. Even the Mountain could not do this. He was simply a killing god. Arthur looked at the remaining 100 Bracken soldiers around him and began to worry whether he could pay off the debt owed to Stonehenge City. Calculated at 100 per person, there were a total of 40,000 gold dragons. As for the worshipful eyes of the soldiers around him who regarded him as a god of war, he did not care too much. The battle just now gave him a lot of experience, so in the later stage of the battle, he was able to upgrade another level. Attribute points continued to increase strength, skill points increased running, 1 increased riding, and weapon points continued to be added to two-handed weapons. Baron, Arthur Braykin level 4 experience, 2466/3000 strength, 17 agility, 11 intelligence, 7 charm, 9 skills, iron bones 4, power attack 7, power throw 1, power bow 1, weapon mastery 2, shield defense 0, running 1, riding 4, horse archery 0, looting 0, coaching 0, tracking 0, tactics 1, guide 0, scouting 0, healing 0, surgery 0, first aid 0, engineering 0, persuasion 1, prisoner management 0, command 3, trading 0, weapon proficiency, one-handed weapons 74, two-handed weapons 115, pole weapons 77, bows and arrows 31, crossbows 31, throwing 31. Andrew also survived, but his condition was not very good. His left arm fell to the side, and blood was also flowing from his right thigh. Although his body was seriously injured, his spirit was very excited. "Sir Arthur, how did you develop your fighting skills? Why can you dominate the battlefield alone? Can you teach me? It may be a talent." Arthur was troubled by the debt crisis and did not want to discuss this topic in depth. The Tully family finally succeeded in separating the two parties, and then they asked the stewards of the two families to come out for a detailed discussion. P.S. Please recommend and vote for the monthly ticket. Chapter 25 Sanctions. Arthur walked to the commander of the Tully family and observed the situation around him. Nearly 500 people were in the middle of the two cloth soldiers to prevent the two families from clashing again. Some Tully soldiers were carrying corpses, and the half-dead wounded were left there waiting for help. From time to time, small groups of 4 or 5 or a dozen soldiers came, which should be the wealthy knights and small nobles nearby who were loyal to the Tully family. The weapons and equipment of the Blackwoods concentrated by the Tully family were much more than those of the Brackens. It seemed that the people on the North Bank were much worse than those on the South Bank. But in fact, if Arthur was not counted, the Bracken soldiers paid the price of nearly 400 people to barely achieve the result of cutting down 300 people on the opposite side. This was the credit of Andrew, who gathered the soldiers together and formed a big circle at the beginning. In this way, each soldier only needs to consider the enemy in front of him, without having to beware of the swords behind him. If there was no formation and fighting, the 500 Brackens would have been cut down long ago. There is no way. The number gap is too big. As for Arthur, he had already rushed out at the beginning of the film, and then hammered through the Blackwood army again and again. He was a power player, and being crowded together limited his performance. Facts have proved that this move was correct. The sledgehammer captured from Santiago was unexpectedly useful. Against a warrior in full armor, a blunt weapon is easier to break through the defense. Arthur was thinking about whether to customize a heavier sledgehammer for himself to use on the battlefield. Earl Titus also came to Commander Tully, but after he saw Arthur come out, he brought a dozen people to surround him in a circle before he dared to come over. A middle-aged strong man wearing fish-scale armor looked at Arthur and the sledgehammer in his hand that was stained with red and white mucus, and sighed. "Why have I never heard of such a good player in Stonehenge City?" he said to Arthur with a smile. Then he came over and patted Arthur on the shoulder. "My name is Desmond Grell, the coach of Reveron." Arthur nodded slightly. "I'm Arthur, Lord Bracken of the Red Mill." Desmond smiled and nodded. "Come to Reveron when you have time, and we will have a fight. I will definitely learn from your skills." Arthur responded to this request. When Earl Titus also came over, a young man wearing fish-scale armor walked up to both parties. Arthur guessed that this person was Edmure Tully, the sharpshooter who would soon become famous in the Three Rivers. "My father has expressly forbidden vassals from fighting each other, so why are you like this?" Edmure looked at Earl Titus, who looked panicked, and then looked at Arthur Bracken, who looked calm and had a ruddy complexion just because of exercise, and decided to start with this little nobleman he didn't know. After all, the Earl was of his father's generation and had a higher status, so it was not good to embarrass him in front of everyone. "Tell me, why do you want to fight with the Earl? If you don't have a legitimate reason, you will be severely punished." Arthur was afraid that the Blackwoods would complain first, but he didn't expect Edmure to ask him to reply first, which made him have a better impression of him. So he organized his words, starting from Brynden pretending to be a bandit to rob the riverside village, to Santiago whipping 3 villagers to death with a horsewhip, including a pregnant woman, and then to him trying to seek justice from the Tullys, but being stopped by the people of Raventree, and asked people to bring the bodies of Brynden, Roger, Santiago, Darren and his wife. During this period, the people of Raventree interrupted several times, but Desmond and Edmure scolded them and let Arthur finish first. "I don't care what the reason is for Brynden to pretend to be a bandit," Arthur concluded, "but the Blackwood family should bear the consequences. I ask the River Warden, Lord Hoster Tully, to give me appropriate compensation for the robbery of my territory, and to give the families of poor Darren and the other 2 women who died tragically the justice they deserve." Edmure looked at Earl Titus, hoping to get an explanation. Although what Arthur said also made him feel that the Blackwood family was too much, he also wanted to hear their side of the matter. Before the Earl of Raventree City could speak, someone loudly argued, "Nonsense, Lord Edmure, he is talking nonsense." Roger, who was tied up, shouted, "It's not like that at all. We were just passing by the Sweetwater Spring in our territory. We didn't expect to be kidnapped by the Slayer who was full of lies. Mr. Santiago came to rescue us out of justice and was seriously injured by him. Lord Edmure, please understand these circumstances." Titus looked at his eldest son and said loudly, "I only know that my eldest son, the heir of Raventree City, was kidnapped by an unknown noble. Please ask the River Guard to do justice for me." Arthur was a little angry. "If your son hadn't had a seizure and ran to my territory to pretend to be a bandit and rob, would I have caught him? There should be some reason. Besides, it was your people who killed people first, and they tortured a pregnant woman." Darren was already trembling with fear when the double cloth soldiers slashed at each other. Fortunately, he was surrounded and not injured. After being brought here, he saw so many nobles wearing exquisite and gorgeous armor. He didn't dare to speak and knelt beside his wife's body to look at her. Seeing the lord arguing with reason and looking at his wife's familiar and pale face, he finally mustered up the courage, opened his arms and begged Edmure, "My wife and my unborn child were beaten to death by this devil. Please let him confess his crime." He pointed at the tied Santaga. "Then I also want them to release the young master, who told them not to release him." Santaga argued and glanced at Arthur. He felt guilty in front of this man. Edmure asked, "So you killed people first?" "I did it for the safety of the young master." The eldest son of the duke looked at the 3 bodies smeared with salt and said with a sympathetic heart, "Anyway, you Blackwood are in the wrong. How about this? The earl compensates the families of these 3 people with 100 gold royals each and gives Mr. Arthur 500 gold royals. Mr. Arthur releases all the captives, and then you compensate each other for the losses of the army, and this matter will be over." 100 gold royals, what are they? Titus shouted regardless of his dignity. "They are just civilians. 1 gold royal per person is already a respect for them." Arthur was not very satisfied with this verdict. He shouted loudly, "Santaga, who killed people, must die. 3 lives cannot be easily dismissed. In addition, the compensation given to me is too little. Is the eldest son of the earl worth 500 gold royals?" The 2 had their own reasons and quarreled with each other. There were many people in Raventry City, and the tied people were shouting and yelling. Brynden insisted on untying himself first. The scene suddenly became chaotic. "Enough," Desmond shouted. "Listen to Lord Edmure." The 2 sides stopped arguing, but it was obvious that they were not convinced by each other. Everyone's life should be respected. Edmure chose his words carefully. "I agree with Mr. Arthur's point of view. Santaga must die. In addition, His Excellency the Earl must increase his bid." Brynden also shouted at this time, "Yes, father, giving this little country noble 3,000 gold royals. If the money is less, it will lose our family's face." Titus glared at his son who was making trouble and told him to shut up. Then he said impatiently, okay, give more money to this greedy and barbaric Bracken." Just when everyone thought he agreed to Edmure's proposal, the Earl shouted again, "But Santaga must live. He is a member of my family. He should not be guilty of crushing a few bugs to save my son." Arthur was furious and shouted, "Be a human being. What is a bug? Is Santaga's life more noble than Darren's wife and the other 2? Darren also groaned, "My poor wife and that unborn child." Seeing that they were about to quarrel again, Edmure hurried to smooth things over. "Well, the dead cannot be resurrected, but Santaga is still alive. How about this, Mr. Arthur? Let him live and give more gold dragons to Darren and you." Seeing that Edmure supported his family, the people of Raventry City started to make noises. "Be content. If you still want to blackmail, giving you 1,000 gold dragons is enough. It is because Lord Edmure and my Earl are too kind that this barbarian succeeded. Can the lives of your 3 untouchables also be worth the life of Santaga?" Arthur saw that Edmure, like the Blackwood family, advocated that the murderer Santaga be kept alive, and suddenly he wanted to do something. Although he also wanted more gold dragons, that was on the premise that justice was served. Just a few more gold dragons. Darren's wife and 3 others died unjustly, and the murderer did not receive any punishment. This obviously did not work. Arthur walked towards Darren and asked softly, "Poor man, what kind of justice do you want? More gold dragons, or to make this murderer bow his head?" Darren's eyes were full of tears, and he could not speak a complete sentence sadly. My lord, I just want justice for my wife, and my children, and for this murderer, to pay with his life." None of the nobles present cared about his thoughts, so he could only pin his hopes on Lord Arthur. Fortunately, Lord Arthur had been fighting for him, which comforted his painful heart a little. "Okay, I got it." Arthur nodded, then slowly raised the sledgehammer in his hand. He just wanted to be serious about things that no one cared about. "If my people don't get the justice they deserve, if this murderer doesn't get the punishment he deserves, if you still think that nobles can wantonly infringe on the lives of civilians and then pay a few gold royals to get away with it, Then, I, Arthur Braykin of the Moulin Rouge, swear here that I will make you get the punishment I think you deserve. P.S. Please recommend on monthly votes. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.